my audio's off. Yep, thank you. So I'm going to start over. Thank you for coming. So this is live stream of the Neuralink. We're going to be watching the Neuralink show and tell is what they're calling it. The Fall Show and Tell 2022. So Neuralink, for those of you that don't know, this is a company primarily funded by Elon Musk, although there are several other venture capitalists that have provided funds for it. So as of like 2019, they had nearly $200 million in funding. And so I assume it's been even more than that. I know also around 2020 or so, they had nearly 100 employees, at least associated with the project. I think that it's largely, they have a headquarters, but it's distributed also across other universities. And essentially the idea behind Neuralink is that it's to have the, it's to have a, it's sort of science fiction to some degree. At least we can take inspiration from science fiction, of course, right? So one idea is that we can have our minds interact with technology directly. So what that requires is some sort of brain-machine interface. And that's really the major goal of Neuralink, is to develop brain-machine interface technology. Now this is it's a technology that has been around for decades. So Bakhtiarita is a famous neuroscientist. That's his last name. His first name escapes me at the moment. But he is probably the forefather of this brain-machine interface technology. In fact, I have a slide I can bring up that I often show to my neuroplasticity class. So I'm going to bring that up. Let's see, brain-machine interface. I suppose it's probably in sensory substitution. Okay, I need to close that. And I know that you guys cannot see that, but now you can see this. So this is a slide from my class. I see we have a few people watching currently. That's great. I see Trip from my classes here, and Scott, you're here. Great, good to see you guys. So brain-machine interface. Bakhtiarita developed this idea of assisting people who are blind by giving them some sort of sensor that is attached to, this sort of looks like a dentist chair, and then it would have these like little sort of sensory nodules that would kind of vibrate. And so there was this array of these little nodules that would vibrate, and it would be reflective of whatever sort of contrast of whatever object was seen by this TV camera. You can see that this is all, it looks old because this was done in, I think, the early 70s. And so this is essentially like the first kind of brain-machine interface. Now, it's clearly not directly involved with the brain. It's more about taking a sensory modality, say vision, and then putting it into a different sensory modality and allowing the brain to perceive it, whatever is in front of a person, the vision, but via somatosensory input. This has continued to go on and develop. And so, still using alternative methods of accessing the nervous system for people, say, who are blind, allowing them to use, say, their somatosensory input. And instead of using the back, which has very low resolution as far as like being able to perceive objects in front of them, there have been additional devices that allow for the perception of certain things in front of them and, say, putting this onto the tongue. Now, I think what we're considering now is using devices that actually directly interact with the brain itself. And I think that's one of the promises of what Neuralink is trying to do. So, yeah. So I wanted to, so we're jumping on here about a half hour before. There's been a number of controversies around Neuralink. I suppose one of them that got a lot of press, and I would say I don't necessarily agree with some of this. I'm going to lower my audio down a little bit. I can see I'm topping out. So they did get, there was a lot of scrutiny over Neuralink because they were doing the brain, well, before we get into that, actually, let's talk a little bit more about what they're doing. And so I'm going to go to their website. Let's do that. All right, Neuralink. And I'm going to bring that up. And you know what? I should also probably add video here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to have that pop up. Yeah, it doesn't look like it wants to cooperate. That's fine. All right, so you're going to hear my voice. That's fine. So this is the Neuralink website. Again, this is Elon Musk's company. And the idea is to develop these devices which are going to allow for multi-electrode array recording of neurons. And so hopefully they have a little bit of that if we click on this. So my students will know what this is. This is just a series of spikes. And you can see that there's a bunch of them here. And this is not a raster plot because this is simultaneous recording of a bunch of different neurons with a single array. So this is like a multi-unit array recording. We talked about this in my intro class. So this would be like an array. And maybe I should bring that up too. So we talked about this in the hippocampus. And honestly, this is the main part of where this kind of technology is used. So this is how you would go about doing this kind of electrophysiological recording. So this is a rat, and it has a wireless device implanted into its brain, particularly in the hippocampus. So this is the hippocampus here. We all know the hippocampus. Many of us, if you know anything about the hippocampus, it's involved in memory. And if you know more about it, you know that it seems to be important for spatial memory. And we know a lot of this work from rodents. A lot of cool stuff about the hippocampus. But essentially what you can do, if you lower a single electrode into the brain, you can record from a single neuron or maybe a group of neurons, and then you will see the electrical activity here. So this is the readout of this particular device, this TREC device that's been implanted in the brain. And honestly, like, technology has gotten even better so that we have devices that are even smaller than this. So it's even less obtrusive onto the heads of these guys. It's pretty extraordinary stuff. So we can record that activity live. So the mouse or the rat can run around and you can see the activity of neurons firing. But the thing is, technology has gotten farther along where we can actually put multiple electrodes onto a single, or I should say multiple electrodes onto a single probe. So we can lower a probe into the brain. So these are the different layers of hippocampus here. And this is the probe that's been inserted into the brain with many different electrodes on there. And this particular electrode has 16. There are others that have like 32 and 64 that are becoming more and more common. And what this means is that you can record from different parts of hippocampus. So this is number 1, and this would be the activity that we're seeing at number 1. And this is like a theta wave that's happening within the whole hippocampus. And then here's 2, and here's 3, here's 4, here's 5. So we simultaneously record from multiple places within the brain. Pretty cool stuff. This, again, is technology that is exciting. I don't think a lot of people outside of neuroscience really know about it. But in neuroscience, we have known about this for some time. And it's cool, and it's amazing, and it has changed a lot of what we now know about how the brain works, because we can simultaneously record from many neurons at the same time. So to show a little bit of what that looks like, we can code each individual neuron and watch how it fires. And we know in the hippocampus that we can watch them fire as they happen. So this is a mouse on a track. Let me stop here. We have a mouse that's on a track that has electrode in the brain, or multi-unit electrode in the brain. So we're recording from several different neurons. What we're showing here is the activity of 10 different neurons that are color-coded. And every little line is when a neuron fired. Okay, so we have this blue neuron that seems to be firing right here, and then we got a light blue neuron that seems to be firing more like here. And we're going to go along the track. So this mouse knows this track. There's a reward right here. And as it goes along, now we see different neurons firing at a different part of the track. And then as it goes along here, now it finally gets down to here where now the 10th neuron is firing at the end. And so essentially what we can see is that there's a pattern, right? There's a part of the track that seems to be particularly sensitive to this blue neuron, or this blue neuron is particularly sensitive to this part of the track, I should say. Then the lighter blue neuron seems to be right here. Then this light green neuron, the yellow and the orange, and then finally the pink. And what we refer to these cells as, we refer to them as place cells. So we can find individual cells as a mouse or a rat is going along the track, and it's firing as it goes along. Pretty cool stuff. So, and this is the advantage of what we can get with a multi-unit electrode, where we record multiple neurons at the same time. So this allows us to find these place cells and actually record from many of them at the same time, and we can create this kind of beautiful interaction here. And I did pause this at a place where there's also a really interesting phenomenon, which is called a sharp wave ripple. So when a mouse finishes a track, what will often happen, not always, but what will often happen is that the neurons will also fire almost simultaneously, but more often in reverse order when they finish the track. So the red neuron will fire first. We'll watch another one and we'll do it again. Another sharp wave ripple. You can see all the neurons seem to fire all at once. And what we know that these sharp wave ripples are actually really important for consolidation of the memory, which is super cool. So if you interfere with these sharp wave ripples when the mouse has finished the track, the next time they try to do the track, they don't actually do the track as well as if you didn't interfere with that sharp wave ripple. It's really cool stuff. So basically this is like a reflection of what this would look like. As a mouse is traversing along, there's going to be neurons that will be firing at particular places. Now, it's not like it's organized in this way. We can do like post hoc analysis and get them organized in the right way. And so that they're finally like have you can basically find a neuron that would fire at every single place, but there's probably dozens, if not hundreds of neurons that are firing even in a mouse brain at a particular place. But because we're only recording from a few of them, we can only see a few of them at a time. And so one of the things that's neat about what Neuralink is doing, if we go to this, we can see that we can record from many different neurons, and the device that they are making is a device that can record from upwards of 1,000 neurons at a single time. So they call these things neural threads, so we can implant this into the brain. So these would be multiple different electrodes that would be implanted directly into the brain to record from, like they say, thousands of neurons. These are very small devices. They operate via Bluetooth, so they can be, talking to other devices nearby, so they can even be implanted under the skin. They're developing machines to do the surgeries. Honestly, I don't know why they would need a machine to do it, but, this is like techno crap, So, and then they're saying that they're going to be developing this app to allow your iPhone. I think it's actually ironic that they're showing an iPhone here, right? Given the trouble that Elon Musk has had with iPhone and Apple for the last couple of, like the last week. But all right. And I suppose what this means is that this would allow the user to train themselves to program the Neuralink, because that's one of the things that's going to be tricky about this, is getting the actual Neuralink information to be meaningful. And this is one thing that I think is kind of a problem with this idea. And I wanted to show a little bit of like the progress update that they did last time. Well, I think this is the last one that they did. Well, this is at least summer 2020. So why don't we watch this a little bit?
All right, welcome to the Neuralink product demo. I'm really excited to show you what we've got. I think it's going to blow your mind. So the primary purpose of this demo is actually recruiting. So I'm going to emphasize this at the beginning and then again at the end. We're not trying to raise money or do anything else. The main purpose of this is to convince great.
This thing, it really looks a lot like something out of Portal 2. And if you've played Portal 2, I wouldn't want to be Elon Musk standing next to this thing.
People to come work at Neuralink and help us bring the product to fruition, make it affordable and reliable, and such that anyone who wants one can have one. And so I want to emphasize the purpose of Neuralink. Like, what's our goal? Our goal is to solve important spine and brain problems with a seamlessly implanted device. So you want to have a device that you can basically put in your head and feel and look totally normal, but it solves some important problem in your brain or spine. And the reality is that almost everyone over time will develop brain and spine problems. These range from minor to very severe, but if you live long enough, everyone's going to basically have some kind of neurological disorder. And these range from memory loss to brain damage. But the thing that's important to appreciate is that an implantable device can actually solve these problems. I think a lot of...
I would say no. I mean, for some of these, I could see some improvement. But for some of these, no. No.
A lot of people don't quite realize that. But all of these, all of your senses, your sight, hearing, feeling, pain, these are all electrical signals sent by neurons to your brain. And if you can correct these signals, you can solve everything from memory loss, hearing loss, blindness, paralysis, depression, insomnia, extreme pain, seizures.
Okay, he's just reading the list. This is incredibly simplistic. Yes, okay, it's true, neurons do fire, have an action potential, but involves what is more or less an electrical signal. Now, this is like a chemically driven electrical change that occurs within a neuron, but there's a lot happening within neurons and also between neurons that is not electrical. And the thing about the Neuralink device is that it can only really, truly, directly influence electrical activity. Yeah.
Anxiety, addiction, strokes, brain damage. These can all be solved with an implantable Neuralink. This is an extremely fundamental thing, and I think a lot of people don't quite understand that. The neurons are like wiring, and you kind of need an electronic thing to solve an electronic problem. So current medical research, we'll just go through what is the state of the art in medical research, and then what's the state of the art in what consumers or people in general can get.
Yeah, Tripp's pointing out that the device, it's not possible to do it with human. I imagine that's true. I don't know. I know that a lot of neurosurgery does involve like robots, so I don't know why they got to make it look like a robot that's out of Portal 2, but okay.
So the current medical research has shown that you can read neurons in a human's brain. So there's something called the Utah array, which has about 100 channels per array. But it's like, kind of like it's a bed of rigid spikes that's literally inserted with an air hammer. So, that's slightly discomforting, I think. And there's wires and a box on your head. And so it's some infection risk. And obviously it will look pretty weird if you walk around with boxes on your head. And in order to use it, you have to have an expert medical professional there. And it's only been done in a few dozen people. So, but it is served out multiple parts, including a piece that it had to sort of sit behind your ear. And it was complex, and you wouldn't still look totally normal. You'd have a thing behind your ear. So we've simplified this to simply something that is about the size of a large coin. And it goes in your skull, replaces a piece of skull, and the wires then connect within a few centimeters or about an inch away from. All you can see afterwards is this tiny scar.
I will admit, like, getting this technology very small and being able to simultaneously record from over 1,000 channels it's impressive. This is certainly an advance. Is it $200 million worth? I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but because it's really, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure what additional resolution gives us, given that you're limited to which part of the brain that you can actually put these into. And this is the thing, like, the brain is very modular. So what I mean by that is that there are different parts of the brain that do different things. Let me bring up, if I got a picture of a brain in here. Yeah, so this is a cross-section of the brain. So this would be the front part of the brain. This is the back part. Prefrontal cortex, frontal cortex. These areas are involved with, like, cognition, emotion processing, logic, reasoning. And then we also, so one thing that's highlighted here, this is the hippocampus right here. This is what it looks like in coronal plane, involved with memory. But then you also have, like, somatosensory and motor cortex, which is along, like, here, kind of going on the other side of the brain. We've got the visual cortex back here. If we could see the other side of the brain, we would see the auditory cortex. The temporal lobe is heavily involved in memory. So if you put this Neuralink in any one place, you're basically only either recording or influencing the activity of neurons at that one place. So it's not like it's going to be a fully integrated system that's going to, like, change activity across the entire brain or be able to record activity across the entire brain. I don't think that that's necessarily what they're promising. And I know the technicians and the scientists that are working on this project, they know that, because in this video, they eventually get to looking at a pig. So why don't we speed up to that?
It was real live
It's
demo.
pretty cool. So they inputted the Neuralink into a pig's brain, and they're going to get it out. They're having a hard time coaxing it out.
In her snout.
There we go.
So whenever she
So these are all the neurons that are being
touches
fired.
something with her snout, that sends out
So this
neural
is
spikes,
simultaneous
which
recording
detect
across
here.
hundreds and hundreds of
So
neurons.
on the screen, you can see each of the spikes from the 1,024 electrodes, and then if she snuffles around, touches her snout in the ground, or you kind of feed her some food, pigs love food, then you can see the neurons will fire much more than when you're not touching the snout.
Right. So he points out that they're firing because it's touching the snout, because they implanted it in the somatosensory cortex, into the part of the somatosensory cortex that is responsible for sensing touch in the snout. It's cool. I think there's some really interesting experiments that you could do with this. You could do that in pigs. You could do this in other animals, and tons of interesting work that involves the somatosensory cortex and reading out, well, what does activity look like when you touch certain parts of the snout to other parts of the snout, what different textures might look like in the activity of these neurons. There's a ton of really interesting experiments that you could potentially do. Beyond that, like, I don't think that this means that, like, with this, like, this kind of connection to just the somatosensory cortex, it's not like you can control the pig or anything like that. This is just an area of the brain that's important for the sensation of things touching the skin. It's not like you're tapping into the pig's consciousness or anything like that, as far as pigs have consciousness, or their sense of emotion or fear or anything. You're just the only thing we're seeing here is activity of neurons as they touch the snout. And part of the reason why you would want to do this as a demonstration is because that looks cool. It looks awesome because you can watch the pig go move around and you can see activity that correlates it precisely when the pig is, like, touching things with its snout. All right, let's go on and get to the live stream. I'm going to go to my video. Hello. I'm going to go to my watch later. Let's click on this. So we're going to wait for them to get the show going. They have not got it going yet. Okay, here we are. You can see I'm a fan of Red Letter Media. They do funny reviews of things. Oh, they just did a new one. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know what to expect. I have a feeling that they may have done some human trials and that this is the report on that. I'm not entirely sure. I hope so. That would be interesting. There's likely to be some, the thing about brain-machine interface is that it does have enormous promise. It does mean that if, I do think for instances when there's, say, someone is blind or if they're lost their hearing, brain-machine interface has enormous promise to bypass the damage, say, of the within the eyes or within the ear, and allow a person to then have some sort of device. And we already do this with like cochlea implants, for instance, or some of those other devices that I was showing, the prosthetic to put it onto the tongue, that will bypass the broken area, say the eyes or the ear, and get that information into the brain so that you can then get that information to, say, the auditory cortex or the visual cortex. And I think the brain-machine interface has enormous promise for that. And I definitely can imagine this kind of technology being advanced in that way. The other thing is the output to control devices. So we could potentially have the output of controlling devices to, controlling like prosthetic limbs using your brain or interacting with a computer. We already can do this. And that certainly is something that if we have more access to more neurons within, say, the motor cortex, we would be able to have even greater control over, say, prosthetic devices, especially with enough training. So I think that also has enormous promise. So I'm curious to see what they're going to talk about here. But if Elon's going to talk about while we're waiting, we can look at this. I was looking at this article. Elon Musk's Neuralink is a neuroscience theater. And I would agree, that's a big thing of what Elon Musk does. It's about show and tell, but not really like putting proof in the pudding. I mean, the guy is famous for being a huge hype man. And without a doubt, I'm sure we're going to see some hype. So he's, promising seeing radar with superhuman vision or rock climbing without fear, that you can tamp down your fear. Finding a cure for blindness, deafness, paralysis, and mental illness. Now, blindness, as I said, and paralysis and deafness, I think that there's definitely promise there. And for mental illness, there's so little that we know about how the brain actually leads to mental illness. Talking about depression or anxiety. We're far, far away from being able to do those kinds of things. We don't even know how it works in the brain to have mental illness. We only have like the broad strokes as far as we know. So, and then there was something in here. Yeah, so it's kind of like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires. I mean, that's totally ludicrous. It's not. You're going to be recording from a certain number of neurons. And that's about it. So, I don't know. I don't get that. All right, we're still waiting. Just checking. Actually, maybe I'll bring this over here so I can keep an eye on it. As this article points out, it's something that's been used and assessed for decades. We have had brain-machine interface devices for a long time, it's important to make advances because we're still a long way from brain-machine interface or brain-computer interfaces. This article is pointing out. But there was something in here about like fighting artificial intelligence. Yeah, so Musk had promised fans of a mind-blowing demonstration of neurons firing inside a living brain. Okay, I didn't realize this, and so then they revealed the pigs, and that's fine. I think that's fine too, right? So it's important to use this in an animal with a relatively large brain. Pigs actually have brains that are surprisingly similar to humans in many ways because they're relatively big animals. Their brains are not that big. but they're a lot bigger than, say, like a mouse or a rat. And the way that the pig brain grows actually has a lot more in common with humans than, say, like the way the mouse does. So there's some reasons to use pigs. Okay, maybe it was this one. So Friday night's demo involved a pig called Gertrude, fitted with what the tech tycoon described as a Fitbit in your skull. The tiny device recorded the animal's neural activity and sent it wirelessly to a screen. A series of beeps happened every time her snout was touched, as I said, because they must have been recording from her somatosensory cortex, indicating activity in the part of her brain seeking out food. Okay, that's not exactly right. I mean, it's just her snout. They could touch it with anything. It doesn't mean that it's just exclusively used for food. I think that this is incredibly profound, commented Musk. And some neuroscience experts were not as easily impressed. Yeah, nothing revolutionary in the presentation. Right. Working through the engineering challenges of placing multiple electrodes in the brain. I would agree with that. Okay, so I don't work on multi-unit electrode imaging or recording. I don't do this kind of electrophysiology. But they're saying, okay, this guy's saying like, 1,024 channels isn't that impressive these days. And I would agree that like the wireless part is pretty impressive because it's so small. That part is very, very impressive. And we're talking about 2 years ago, so I am interested to see what the new thing is. Yeah, what do you do with all this brain data? This is actually a big issue. And the thing about the clip that we just saw with the somatosensory cortex, I mean, that's stuff that's been done for, well over a decade, where we've been recording activity in the somatosensory cortex from animals for at least a couple of decades, and with multi-unit electrodes, certainly longer than 1 decade ago. So, and the fact that you can increase the array to, over 1,000 channels, I would say I'm impressive with that. I guess I guess this guy's not so impressed, but I'm pretty impressed, I would say. Apparently they're taking a little while. Let me check their website just to see. Let's go to their webpage, because maybe we're missing it. Watch the update. No, it just takes it to the link. Okay. Well, all right. So we're all waiting for Elon Musk. Yes, that's right, Kevin. Thank you. Come on, Elon. You're late. Maybe he had sent the information to the team via Twitter and it just didn't get to everyone. It's a possibility. Oh, that's funny. Let's take a look at some of this. One second. This is solid engineering but mediocre neuroscience. And then Elon Musk tweeted out, it is unfortunately common for many in academia to overweight the value of ideas and underweight bringing them to fruition. For example, the idea of going to the moon is trivial, but going to the moon is hard. That's my best South African accent. It's never good. Yeah. Okay. Far from being stuck in an ivory tower, Professor Jackson is involved in practical research. He has explored helping spinal injury patients by relaying signals from their brains to their spinal cords to restore some arm movements. That's pretty cool. Trying to bypass where the injury is, say in the like where it might be in the back. And so that's kind of cool. All right, come on, Elon. Let's get the show on the road, man. They are 11 minutes late now. Everyone who's been working in this field for a while is excited by the possibilities that come when you get big tech companies and enthusiastic supporters trying to put money behind this. There's something to be said for not biting the hand that feeds you. So I'm sure that the researchers that are working on this, obviously they feel genuinely enthusiastic about this, and they should, right? Like it's great to have that kind of support. But at the same time, like there's reasons to be skeptical of promises of the moon, or say going to Mars. Why don't I go back to that video since we're waiting. One second.
Out. And that's what's making the beeping sound. All right, cool. So as you can see, we have a healthy and happy pig. Initially shy, but obviously high energy and kind of loving life. And she's had the implant for 2 months. So this is a healthy and happy pig with an implant that is 2 months old and working well. Yeah.
Oh, Trip points out, I didn't realize that, that Tim Cook gave Elon a tour of the Apple HQ. That's pretty funny. CEOs, they're not like regular people.
All right, cool. And then we actually have, I'm not sure how this works, so we said, well, what if we do 2 Neuralink implants? And we've been able to do dual Neuralink implants in, actually I think 3 pigs at this point, and we have a couple of them here. And we've been able to show that you can actually have multiple Neuralinks implanted, and again, healthy and happy and indistinguishable from a normal pig. So it's possible to have multiple links in your head and have them all be sending out signals and be working well. All right. Phew. All right, so we just showed you a demonstration of reading brain activity. And probably see that. As I was saying, each of those dots represents a neural spike, and the blue chart at the bottom is showing an accumulation of neural spikes in that region.
Pretty good description.
So in terms of additional brain reading activity, when we have, say, one of our pigs on a treadmill, pig on a treadmill. It's a funny concept, really. And we take the readings from the neurons, and we try to predict the position of the joints. And so we have the predicted position of the joints, and then we measure the actual position of the joints. You can see that they're almost exactly aligned. So we're able, with a wireless neural implant, to actually predict the position of all of the limbs in the pig's body.
So, okay, this seems impressive initially. And, at one point this would be kind of dumbfounding, but this has already been done. This kind of predictive output. And it's only because, I imagine what they're having here is that this is probably a recording being made in some part of the motor cortex. And they're able to read out different parts of the motor cortex that are involved with like parts of the body. And essentially what they're monitoring is just change in activity while the pig is walking. And walking is actually, surprisingly, from a neural perspective, relatively simple because it involves the activation of a central pattern generator. And you can see that essentially what you have is just a rise and fall of activity in certain parts of the pig. And I would be interested to know like which parts of the brain they're actually looking at, because actually I'd be surprised if they are in fact recording from multiple parts. I wonder if they did this like post hoc, because some of it doesn't actually make sense with the fact that it seems completely synchronous. Now that I'm looking at this, I have a feeling that they are simply looking at one particular part of, say, the motor cortex or even the somatosensory cortex, and and they're reading out activity of neurons that are involved with a particular part, like say maybe the right front leg, and they're just correlating certain parts of the rest of the body to go along with the activity of neurons that happen to be firing within the right front leg. And again, it's because there is just a repeated pattern of movements that occur. And so it's not surprising that they could actually now that I think about this, this actually doesn't look right. Because you would imagine, like if they're recording from the left leg, like right here, for instance, the back leg, you can see that this muscle here should be contracting when this one is relaxing. And so if we're talking about like the gray neurons here, they should be actually increasing in their firing rate while this one is decreasing. Now it should be also a circadian, a sinusoidal pattern. There should be a repeated pattern. That's why it's a central pattern generator. But I don't think that they're recording from several areas of motor or somatosensory cortex here, because you can see it's all entirely lined up, rising in activity across all of these neurons. Oh, all right. Again, I'm not surprised that you can correlate parts of the pig's body with the activity here, but that doesn't mean that the activity here actually correlates, that it's controlling these parts of the body, or that it's sensitive to changes in the position of these parts of the body either. I'm pretty sure that this is kind of just playing with the data and just trying to find different spots in the pig to make it correlate with neural activity, because there's no way that these would be following the same cycle. Hopefully you guys are following me. Like the fact that the activity is increasing in all of these neurons at the same time, that's impossible that would be the case. Like this blue one would be relaxing while this one is contracting, right? The leg is pulling its way back, so these muscles would be contracting here, and this muscle would be contracting here, and this one would be relaxed. I mean, I don't even think there's a neuron there, in fact. I think that this is garbage. I don't believe this at all. I mean, I believe that they have activity here. I believe that they were able to correlate it with like changes in positions of the pig's body, but they're implying that somehow they're recording from the same neurons that correlate with these parts of the body, and that's impossible to have this pattern. Okay, well that's garbage. Yeah. Let's see. So the electrodes can cover a very large portion of the brain, and the automatic machine bends the electrodes around unwanted areas, both X, Y, and Z. That's interesting. I wonder if that's in here. He has a part where he talks about 2-photon imaging, like being able to record. He doesn't describe it very well, but while we're waiting, we can watch this.
Now, in terms of writing to the brain or stimulating neurons, we also need precise control of the electric field in space and time. We need a wide range of current for different brain regions. Some regions require delicate stimulation, some require a lot of current, and you want obviously no harm to the brain over time. And the way part of the way we analyze the stimulating neurons is with a 2-photon microscopy. I always have trouble pronouncing that, microscopy.
You didn't really have it right either time. It's microscopy.
It's very impressive technology. You can actually literally see in real time how the neurons are firing. So the red sort of things are the neurons. The red sort of flashing things are the neurons firing, or I should say the electrodes firing.
He's using computer language, like you would write to like a hard drive. And this is the thing. It's like, okay, they have stimulating electrodes in here, okay? So they're using the Neuralink to act and stimulate parts of the brain. I'm going to guess this is probably in a mouse, because this is just easier to do in mice. Maybe this is in pig. You could do it in pig, but that would be harder. So they have some sort of stimulated electrode in here. Let's back up just a bit.
Yeah.
Stimulate
the electrodes firing. So the red things are electrodes firing, and then the green are the neuron bodies.
So he probably has some just sort of calcium indicator in here. So when a neuron fires, There's a big increase in intracellular calcium. Oh, I hear music. You hear that? I think we're ready. All right, let's close that. Boink. All right, so this is live. We're going to be watching. You're going to get critique from a neuroscience professor who does not do electrophysiology, but I do know a fair amount about the brain. And we're going to be looking at Neuralink. See what they're going to be talking about. So finally we got the game going. They're 22 minutes late, but you know what? Like, I've waited longer for other things, so I guess we can't complain too much. That music sucks. All right, I'm going to talk over it. So, yeah. I don't know when the last update was. I have not followed Neuralink all that closely. It's probably something I'll keep my eye on going forward. It's an opportunity to, this is obviously like a big show for neuroscience. Honestly, that's really what it is. I mean, Elon Musk is good with shows. Okay, I take that back. He does shows. Let's put it that way. he's good at doing shows. He's not. Let's see. Let me see if I can find the Tesla robot while we're waiting. So he had promised at one point that he was going to have a robot, and here, let's put this over here. And he didn't have a robot, so it's so funny. Yeah, here we go. So he had someone dress up in a robot costume. We're still waiting.
Thank you.
Oh, you can't see it. Oh, let me back up. Oh. So stupid. Oh, it's good at shows, I guess. Oh my God, it's so funny.
All right. Thank you.
Look at him, he's like, get off the stage. That is so funny. Oh my God. Too funny. All right, so we're still waiting. I'm trying to watch. So let's go back to this where he's talking about the 2 photon. Oh, hold on. Dang it. Okay. It looks like they're up. Okay, so it's obnoxious, crappy techno music. Alright. I hope he brings out the robots. Elon's been so full of crap for so long. And now he's full of crap as far as the brain goes. Alright, come on. Oh my god. Alright. Yeah, right. Tripp points out that Elon has Asperger's, which is, it's a serious it's obviously a serious condition, and certainly it explains why he's kind of an awkward presenter. And for him to be like, I guess at one point the richest person in the world, obviously that's a huge thing, and it may explain some of his appreciation for machinery, since that is, Asperger's is kind of a form of autism. And, as we talked about in class yesterday, in my intro to neuro class, that many autistic individuals have a tendency to be obsessed with machinery. So that would explain some of, I guess his passions. It doesn't necessarily explain his eccentricities, nor his rampant, political leanings that I have issues with. Now I'm not going to go into it too much, but he's very good at selling stuff and selling ideas. Really, I should say. I don't know if he's all that great at selling stuff. He's great at selling ideas. He's great at building giant sort of projects. I'm going to lower this a little bit. Jesus Christ. Okay. And I'll bring that up again. Hyperloop has been this huge sort of disappointing scam. And if anything, it's just been an effort to get municipal governments supporting his cockamamie idea for the Hyperloop. It's just completely impractical. Any real engineer who has not paid off that has looked at it has shown that it's completely impractical. So, all right, come on, Elon. We're now 30 minutes late. Oh, man. Oh, my God, this music is awful. Oh. Okay, I'm going to mute that again. Oh. Oh, God. That is rough. All right, let me see if I can find a video of the Neuralink monkeys. While we wait. All right. I'm going to come back to that. Okay, we're going to watch this.
This is Paige. He's a 9-year-old macaque who had a Neuralink placed in each side of his brain about 6 weeks ago. If you look carefully, you can see that the fur on his head hasn't quite fully grown back yet. He's learnt to interact with a computer for a tasty banana smoothie delivered through a straw. We can interact with the Neuralinks simply by pairing them to an iPhone, just as you might pair your phone to a Bluetooth speaker. The links record from more than 2,000 electrodes implanted in the regions of Paige's motor cortex that coordinate hand and arm movements. Neurons in this region modulate their activity with intended hand movement. For example, some might become more active when he moves his hand up, and others when he moves it to the right. By recording from many neurons and feeding their activity into a decoder algorithm, we are able to predict Paige's intended hand movements in real time. First, we calibrate the decoder by recording neural activity as Pager uses the joystick to move a cursor to targets presented on the screen. As he's playing this game, we're wirelessly streaming, in real time, the firing rates from thousands of neurons to a computer. Using these data, we calibrate the decoder by mathematically modeling the relationship between patterns of neural activity and the different joystick movements they produce. After only a few minutes of calibration, we can use the output from the decoder to move the cursor instead of the joystick. Pager still moves the joystick out of habit, but as you can see, it's unplugged. He's controlling the cursor entirely with decoded neural activity. Our goal is to enable a person with paralysis to use a computer or phone with their brain activity alone. Because they wouldn't be able to move a joystick, they would calibrate the decoder by imagining hand movements to targets.
I just realized I was muted the whole time. Crap. Hello. Yeah. So we're still waiting. Yes, I was talking the whole time. So that's cool. All right. So one issue with, and this is part of the reason why I don't like doing live streams. I can edit all that crap out and then like, you know, make sure that I have a nice video. So, all right. We're not muted anymore. So one thing about what's happening here with the monkey is that the monkey will be moving his hand and, you know, to drive the joystick. And the neural activity that's happening within the decoder, it's reading the activity, probably neurons in the motor cortex. And it's allowing for those neurons to fire. And there'll be some neurons that say maybe are firing or increasing their firing rate as the monkey is moving the cursor down to, say, this quadrant. And then there'll be maybe different neurons, or neurons will fire in a different way as the monkey is moving the cursor over here. And then different neurons will fire in a different way as it moves over here. So that's the way it would get decoded. It looks like we are ready. Ooh, that's loud. Sorry about that. All right. We're finally on. Nearly 40 minutes late. He does like to do a show.
Welcome to the Neuralink Show and Tell. So we've got an amazing amount of new developments to share with you that I think are incredibly exciting, as well as tell you about the future of what we're planning to do here. Welcome to the Neuralink Show and Tell. So this is meant to be an amazing amount of technical podcast, sort of like developments to share with you. I'm going to provide an overall summary, and then we're going to have a number of members of the Neuralink team come in and give a deep technical incredibly exciting, as well as tell you about the. So let me move forward with the overall summary. Now, some of the things I'm going to say are things if you've been following Neuralink,
I have I must have a different one playing. Hold on. Where is it? Ah, okay. Go away, you. Okay. 1 second. Okay, here we are.
All right, welcome to the Neuralink Show and Tell. So we've got an amazing amount of new developments to share with you that I think are incredibly exciting, as well as tell you about the future of what we're planning to do here. It's and now this is meant to be
the sound is off a little.
Podcast, sort of like I'm going to provide an overall summary. And then we're going to have a number of members of the Neuralink team come in and give a deep technical overview of the various areas. So let me move forward with the overall summary. Now, some of the things I'm going to say are things if you've been following Neuralink, you've already heard before, but for a lot of people out there, they've no idea what Neuralink does. And so I will be a little bit repetitive of things you may already know, but that others do not. So. The overarching goal of Neuralink is to create ultimately a whole brain interface. So a generalized input-output device that, in the long term, literally could interface with every aspect of your brain, and in the short term, can interface with.
Okay, I'm not the only one who screws up video. You saw that they were covering up their short-term goals.
any given section of your brain and solve a tremendous number of things that cause debilitating issues for people. So, so our long term is I'll talk a little bit about our long term goal. It's going to sound a little esoteric, but it was actually the sort of my prime motivation, which was, what do we do about AI? Like, what do we do about artificial general intelligence? If we have digital superintelligence that's just much smarter than any human, how do we mitigate that risk? At a species level, how do we mitigate that risk?
What is he talking about?
And then even in a benign scenario where the AI is very, very benevolent, then how do we even go along for the ride? How do we participate? And the conclusion, the thing that the biggest limitation in going along for the ride and in aligning AI, I think, is the bandwidth, the how quickly you can interact with the computer. So we are all already cyborgs in a way, in that your phone and your computer are extensions of yourself. And I'm sure you found, like, if you leave your phone behind, you end up tapping your pockets, and it's like having missing limb syndrome. Like,
If you're obsessed with checking your latest tweets, I imagine that's true.
The phone leaving your phone behind is kind of like a missing limb at this point. You're so used to interfacing with it. You're so used to being a de facto cyborg. So what's the limitation on a phone or a laptop? The limitation is the rate at which you can receive and send information, especially the speed with which you can send information. So if you're interacting with a phone, it's limited by the speed at which you can move your thumbs, or the speed at which you can talk into your phone. This is an extremely low data rate. Maybe it's like 10, optimistically 100 bits per second, but a computer can communicate at gigabits, terabits per second. So this is the fundamental limitation that I think we need to address to mitigate the long-term risk of artificial intelligence.
What is he talking about? I mean, the brain is going to be limited in its number of bits per second that it can put out. It's not going to be gigabits, that's for sure. It just doesn't work that way.
And also just go along for the ride. And yeah. So, but like I said, that's an esoteric explanation that I think will appeal to a niche audience, some of whom may be here. And that's a very difficult problem. So even if we do not succeed with that problem, I think we are confident at this point that we will succeed at many, at solving many brain injury issues, spine injury issues along the way. So, yeah. So, anyways. So actually we have Justin Roiland in the audience. Hi, Justin. So it's a little Rick and Morty reference here. There's a great Rick and Morty episode about intelligence enhancement of your dog, and what's the worst that can happen? So anyway, Rick and Morty, I recommend it. So you want to be able to read the signals from the brain. You want to be able to write the signals. You want to be able to ultimately do that for
we can't
the
see his
entire
screen.
brain.
See? I'm not doing this. This is their presentation. You
to,
can't see what he's actually presenting. Oh, wait, it's down here.
To the rest of your nervous system, if you have a sort of a severed spinal cord or neck. So there now this is this video is now 18 months old. So this is Pager, who is playing monkey mind.
Okay, so one thing about this that I was trying to show is that at this point they've completely removed the joystick, so the monkey's not using the joystick, and they're like, oh wow, he's using just his mind to do it. Watch carefully though. This monkey is moving its hand. It's moving it up and down to move the Pong cursor up and down. You can see the monkey moving, and that's what's causing it to go up and down. So it's not like the monkey is just using only mind activity to do it. Of course, the mind is involved, but it's using the motor cortex to move the Pong paddle up and down. But it's still, you can see the monkey pushing and pulling on the. This is delivering juice. Okay, so just watch.
Mind Pong. So this is a Pager has a Neuralink implant in this video. And the thing that's interesting is that you can't even see the neural implant. So we've miniaturized the neural implant to the point where it matches the thickness of the skull that is removed. So it's essentially it's sort of like having an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, replacing a piece of skull with like a smartwatch. For lack of a better analogy. So you can see, you really can't, he looks pretty, he's normal. And I think that's pretty important. If you have a Neuralink device, like I could have a Neuralink device implanted right now, and you wouldn't, you wouldn't even know. I mean, hypothetically, maybe one of these demos, in fact,
oh God,
one of these demos I will. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. Anyway, so here's I mean, first of all, it's kind of wild. Hey, monkeys can play Pong. Like they can actually play Pong if you give them a joystick. So Pedro first learned to play Pong with a joystick. So I'm like, that was novel. It's like I didn't know monkeys could play Pong, but they can. And then, so we first trained Pager to play Pong with a joystick. Then we took the joystick away and have the Neuralink. And now he's playing it's a telepathic video games, essentially.
It's not telepathic. The monkey's still moving his hand, and they're using the decoder for the motor cortex to control the Pong paddle. And you can see the monkey moving up and down to move the control paddle. It's just that the monkey, instead of holding the joystick, is now holding the juice dispenser. That's all it's doing. It's still cool. I'm not saying that it's not, but it's not like the monkey is just sitting there and not moving at all. It's moving. It's causing activity in the motor cortex. Their device, the Neuralink, is reading that activity and then causing the paddle to move up and down. So, I mean, there's a little bit of flim-flam in here.
So what we've been doing since then is,
and as Gabe points out, this is something that you do in the lab. Like we can do this with humans
journey from
in 3 hours,
prototype to product,
using like an electrode array skull cap.
Prototypes are easy, production is hard. It's really, I'd say, 100 to 1,000 times harder to go from a prototype to a device that is safe, reliable, works under a wide range of circumstances, is affordable, and done at scale. It's insanely difficult. I mean, there's an old saying that that it's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, but I think it might be 99%, 99.9% perspiration. The best example I could give of an idea being easy, but the execution being hard, is going to the moon. It's the idea of going to the moon, easy. Going to the moon, very hard. So, we've been working hard to be ready for our first human, and obviously we want to be extremely careful and certain that it will work well before putting a device in a human. But we've submitted, I think, most of our paperwork to the FDA, and we think probably in about 6 months, we should be able to have our first Neuralink in a human. So. But as I said, we do everything we possibly can to test the devices before, not even going into a human, before even going into an animal. So we do benchtop testing, we do accelerated life testing. We have a fake brain simulator that has the texture and it's like emulating a brain, but it's sort of rubber. And so before we would even think of putting a device in an animal, we do everything we possibly can with rigorous benchtop testing. So we're not cavalier in putting devices into animals. We're extremely careful, and we always want the device, whenever we do the implant, if it's in a sheep or a pig or monkey, to be confirmatory, not exploratory, so that we've done everything we possibly can with benchtop testing, and only then would we consider putting a device in an animal. Yeah, we'll actually show you a demo later today in a few hours really, of implanting in a brain proxy. And if anyone in the audience wants to volunteer, we have the robot right there. So let's see, and since the page of demo, we've expanded to work with a troop of 6 monkeys. We've actually upgraded Pager. They do varied tasks, and we do everything possible to ensure that things are stable and replicable, and that that the device lasts for a long time without degradation. So, and what you're seeing there is, it looks like the matrix, but that's actually, that's a real output of neural signals. So that's not a simulation or just a screensaver or something. Those are actual neurons firing.
I get that this is probably interesting to, I don't know, or impressive to a general audience, but for anyone who knows anything about neuroscience, this isn't exciting. This is essentially just a multi-unit array output, and you're just looking at the activity of many neurons all at once. 15 years ago, this would have been really exciting.
That is what one of the readouts looks like. And here you can see Sake, it's one of our other monkeys, typing on a keyboard. But now this is telepathic typing. So to be clear, he's not actually using a keyboard. He's moving the cursor with his mind to the highlighted key. Now technically, you can't actually spell and.
I see movement. I mean, it's the same thing with the other monkey and pulling on the juice dispenser. You can see the monkey's moving. Maybe, I don't know.
So I don't want to oversell this thing, because that's the next version. But what's really cool here is Sake the monkey is moving the mouse cursor using just his mind, moving the cursor around to the highlighted key, and then spelling out what we want to spell. But and then
and this isn't even moving here. This isn't even a video.
This is something that could be used for somebody who's say quadriplegic or tetraplegic human. Even before we make the spinal cord stuff work,
sure,
is being able to control a mouse cursor, control a phone, and we're confident that someone who has basically no other interface to the outside world would be able to control their phone better than someone who has working hands. So. Yeah. And I mentioned upgradability. Upgradability is very important because our first production device will be much like an iPhone 1. And I'm pretty sure you would not want an iPhone 1 stuck in your head if the iPhone 14 is available. So it's going to be, being able to demonstrate full reversibility and upgradability, so you can remove a device and replace it with the latest version, or if it stopped working for any reason, replace it. That's a fundamental requirement for the device at Neuralink.
Fair enough. I think that's a good idea. The thing, though, it's going to be true with any device. I mean, it's going to be. I mean, so they've got this implanted underneath the skin on top, underneath the scalp, outside of the skull, or basically sort of fashioned to the skull, and then the device. So basically, you'd have to like cut open the scalp, take the bits outside that's within the device out, put in new, components. Obviously, the array that's inside your brain, that can't really change unless you pull the entire array out and then implant new electrodes.
And I should say both Sake and Page were upgraded to our latest and greatest implants. That's been really over a year and a half now that Pager's had for the first implant and then the upgraded implant. So this is a very good sign that it lasts for a long time with no observed ill effects.
So you're saying cochlear implants are not upgradable. I don't think that's true. It's the array that goes inside the cochlea that you're not going to be able to really take out. But there is a device that's up on the outside of the skull, underneath the skin, and that thing could potentially be taken out and then replaced. I don't know if they actually do that, but it could, and I think you could design them to do that.
I think it's also important to show that Sake actually likes doing the demo, and is not like strapped to the chair or anything. So So the monkeys actually enjoy doing the demos because they get the banana smoothie, and it's kind of a fun game. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is like we care a great deal about animal welfare, and I'm pretty sure like our monkeys are pretty happy, So as you can see, a quick decision maker on the fruit front. So.
Yeah.
So for our, the first two applications we're going to aim for in humans are restoring vision, and I think this is like notable in that even if someone has never had vision ever, like they were born blind, we believe we can still restore vision.
I don't know if I believe that. The visual cortex gets reassigned to do different things if someone is congenitally blind. I talk about this in my neuroplasticity class. So people who are born blind, their visual cortex gets reassigned to do things like touch. So oftentimes when they're reading quote unquote Braille, the visual cortex is used for that. I have a feeling that when a blind person is quote unquote reading Braille, that it is at least using some of the circuitry that the visual cortex also probably has over the course of development to some degree of like our understanding of space. And I think that a blind person probably is using their fingers to use those conceptual space areas to do that, and probably also sound to some degree as well, because blind people can actually do, believe it or not, they're capable of doing echolocation. So that's the thing. If you're born congenitally blind, if those areas aren't getting visual input, and then all of a sudden if you add a camera, I don't think that, like, especially if this is someone who's an adult and they were blind their entire lives, I'd be surprised if they would be able to see if you just add a camera to a Neuralink device that's implanted into the visual cortex. Let's see what he's saying.
Because the visual part of the visual part of the cortex is still there. Yeah, even if they've never seen before, we're confident that they could see.
This is what I'm saying. But it's used to do different things. So it becomes sensitive to somatosensory information and probably also hearing information. So the cortex, yes, it's still there. And in fact, blind people, congenitally blind people, they actually have a thicker visual cortex. So the visual cortex is here towards the back. Their visual cortex is actually thicker than sighted individuals. So it's not like it regresses and just disappears. In fact, if anything, it's maybe a bit bigger. But it gets, like I said, it gets taken over by other senses. So it's not like it's not being used and it's just waiting for a Neuralink device to come in and bypass it. Now, if you have someone who's born congenitally blind and you add some sort of device like this when they're young, well, that's a different story. So, it takes time for these neural circuits to sort of develop. And if you do it, say, in an infant, you actually likely would have pretty good success in getting that infant to see and use like a prosthetic visual camera like this through a Neuralink device. But in an adult, I don't think it'd work.
See, and then the other application being in the motor cortex, where we would initially enable someone who has no ability, almost no ability to operate their muscles, sort of like a sort of Stephen Hawking type situation, and enable them to operate their phone faster than someone who has working hands. But then obviously even better than that would be to bridge the connection. Take the signals from the motor cortex, and let's say somebody's got a broken neck, then bridging those signals to Neuralink devices located in the spinal cord. So we're confident there are no physical limitations to enabling full body functionality. As miraculous as it may sound, we're confident that it is possible to restore full body functionality to someone who has a severed spinal cord. So, yeah.
Thank you. So that would be, thanks, Trip. I need you here to be my production manager. Okay, so what I was saying is that that would require more than just the Neuralink. So Neuralink, it's going to be able to read input or read output from the brain in a particular part of the brain, and I agree that like this has the potential of helping people who are, say, quadriplegic. But if they have damage, say, up here in the neck and the spinal cord is severed here, you're going to have to then also get that information down to the motor units that are down here in the spinal cord. So it's going to have to involve like some external sort of wires that connect to all these different areas to bypass it. That's not to say that it couldn't happen, but it's, a person's going to look pretty cyborg-ish in order to drive those motor units. Now, one thing you could have is a Neuralink that's attached to some sort of like a, mechanical shell, sort of like that the guys use in Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar. Some like mecha type thing. And that could be driven by Neuralink. And then you wouldn't have to have that surgical implant into the spinal cord. But you would have to have that. So, okay, well, let's keep going.
So, yeah. All right. And then I want to emphasize again that the primary purpose of this update is recruiting. A lot of times people think that they couldn't really work at Neuralink because they don't know anything about biology or how brains work. And the thing that we really want to emphasize here is that you don't need to, because when you break down the skills that are needed to make Neuralink work, it's actually many of the same skills that are required to make a smartwatch or modern phone work. So it's sort of, software, batteries, radios, inductive charging, and as well as things that are specific to us, like animal care and clinical and regulatory matters. Obviously, machine learning, that phrase is used a lot. But we obviously need to interpret the signals from the brain, which is a biological neural net, and the best thing to interpret a biological neural net is a digital neural net. So this is, if there's one message I want to convey, it is that if you have expertise in creating advanced devices like watches and phones.
Yeah, Trip, your question about like how much battery power would you need to drive the the muscles? Well, okay, so the muscles themselves are obviously driven by the energy that's within the muscles, right? So there's that. You would just need enough energy, quote unquote, battery power to drive activity of those motor units, right? And so yeah, you would have to have some kind of implant along your spinal cord to each of the dermatomes, each of the segments along the spinal cord. So basically each vertebra implanted to the motor units that are found in the ventral horn of the spinal cord. Okay. So you would have to have that. I'll play this and I'll pull that up.
Computers, then your capabilities would be of great use in solving these important problems.
Yep.
That's more than anything the message I want to convey. Let's see. Yeah. So with that, I guess.
So this is what I was saying. Our spinal. So this is a cross section of the spinal cord. Here's what the spinal cord looks like, actually. So this is the brain. Here's the spinal cord. Say you have damage here. So students in my intro to neuro class that are watching, they'll know this. But we have input that comes through the dorsal portion. So the sensory input comes through here and then goes up to the brain. And then the ventral portion of the spinal cord, right here, which we call the ventral horn, this is going to have motor units that synapse onto the muscles to drive activity of the muscles. So you would have to have some kind of implant to drive certain segments of motor units to drive muscles in a particular fashion. And the thing about the dorsal horn is that it generally has what we refer to as a somatotopic map, right? So if we're talking about the portion of the spinal cord right here that innervates the muscles of the arms, you would have to have electrodes that go into this part and then stimulate, say, the muscles like your deltoid and your bicep. So the motor units that are located here, they control these muscles. And then out here towards the more, so this is medial, this is lateral, the more lateral portion of the dorsal horn, the neurons that are here are going to be controlling the muscles in the hand and the muscles in the fingers. And so you'd have to have electrodes like all along in here in order to control the muscles of the arm like this. And then you would have to do the same thing for the legs. Same thing. So there's then a map in here for like the thigh and then for the toes for this portion of the spinal cord located here. And then here is going to have motor units that are going to control the abdominal muscles and like muscles in the back. And you'd have to have coordination of all these muscle groups in order to, say, have someone stand and walk and lift things. So to replicate that would be really challenging. All right, let's go to this.
DJ. So DJ's was on the founding team of Neuralink and has made immense contributions to the company, as have many of the others who will present. But I want just to thank DJ for his immense contribution to Neuralink and. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Elon. When I moved from South Korea at age 13 and needed to learn a new language to communicate, I wondered whether there are better and more effective means of communicating my thoughts to the outside world. And watching Neo learn Kung Fu in The Matrix, I remember thinking, wow, I want to work on that, work on making that possible. And today, I believe that this is a tractable engineering challenge. Since everything about your intentions, your thoughts, and your experiences are all in your brain, encoded as firing statistics of action potentials, if you're able to put electrodes in the right places with the right sensing and stimulation capabilities, this and many other applications that Elon talked about are possible, and we can help a lot of people. I'm incredibly excited to be working on this ambitious yet important mission to make that future a reality here at Neuralink. And I'm also incredibly honored to be working with some of the brilliant colleagues, scientists and engineers across many engineering disciplines, to work on this intersection of biology
right. Doing
and
splits
technology.
without training.
You'll hear from several of them
that.
today to learn about the breadth of technical challenges we
Definitely.
face and our progress in the last year. And I think you'll find that for most of these challenges, as Elon mentioned, you don't need a prior understanding of how the brain works, and that a lot of what we do is applying engineering first principles to biology. So how do you create a high bandwidth generalized interface to the brain? From day one, we focused on a set of foundational technologies that are safe, scalable, and capable of accessing all areas of the brain. These three axes, safety, scalability, and access to brain regions, really form the basis for how we engineer products here at Neuralink. Safety, because we want to make our devices as well as the installation as safe as possible so that we can drive the adoption of this technology. And scalability, because as we make our devices safer and more useful, more people will want it. And with scale, we also want to make it more affordable. And access to brain regions so that we can expand the functionalities of our technologies. So our first steps along these dimensions for our device is what we call the N1 implant. It's a size of about a quarter, and it has over 1,000 channels that are capable of recording and stimulating. It's microfabricated on a flexible thin film arrays that we call threads. It's fully implantable and wireless, so no wires, and after the surgery, the implant is under the skin and it is invisible. It also has a battery that you can charge wirelessly, and you can use it at home. So similarly, for implanting our device safely into the brain, we built a surgical robot that we call the R1 robot. It's capable of...
Again, this thing looks like it's right out of a Portal 2. This looks like it's going to shoot you. Tim, let's see. You ask what happens if you go through a metal detector. I mean, okay, people have all kinds of metal that gets implanted into their body. This certainly would set it off without a doubt. I don't think that the metal detector would like cause any problems for the device, for sure. There's one thing I've thought about. Like, if you have a device in your head that is Bluetooth readable, oh yeah, so one with a thousand spinal cord implants, that one certainly could potentially have issues. Now, the thing about like let's see. So if we had a if you have a device that so they're talking about like also having a device that they can read to the brain through, right? That's part of the goal. Because you would want to have that digital information getting into your head somehow, right? The latest Elon tweet just kind of goes right into some part of your brain. Okay, we don't have a Twitter part of our brain, right? You see it, you use your visual cortex to read it, then we have additional areas of our visual stream that have to process that information, and then we have language centers that need to interpret that. So where would you put the device to have that information go through? Because it's a highly coordinated series of neural impulses that go through the brain in a coordinated way. Like as I'm reading words, I read the letters. There's this phenomenon of being able to read a word like as you're reading it, but then you got to go to the next word and to the next word, and there's predictive components to that. That's where the language processing comes in. I don't know where the input to the brain would be to be like, oh, latest Elon tweet. I just all of a sudden have it. Now, all right, if this is a Bluetooth device that can get this input, right? Like, so it's attached to your phone, oh, I get the latest Elon tweet, just put into my brain someplace, my Twitter part of the brain. How is that not hackable, right? Like, so it's Bluetooth accessible. I mean, I guess there's probably security to make sure that like other people can't do that, but to me this seems like potentially dangerous to have something that is just kind of open to Bluetooth signals reading to your brain. All right. Anyway, let's go back to this.
Maneuvering these tiny threads, they're only on the order of few red blood cells wide. And
no MRI,
inserting
that's
them
for sure.
reliably
You're right.
into a moving brain while avoiding vasculature. It's quite good at doing this reliably. And in fact, because we've never shown an end-to-end insertion of a robot in action, we're going to do a live demo of the robot doing surgery in our brain proxy. So who wants to see some insertions?
So this device is cool. I think that this is a neat idea. Oh God.
So
It's
here it
not
is.
the robot, is
That's
it?
our
It's gonna
R1
start
robot
dancing.
with our patient alpha who's lying
What is the robot? Okay.
comfortably on the patient bed. This is what we call the targeting view. So what you're seeing is this is a picture of our brain proxy. And the pink represents the cortical surface that we want to insert our electrodes into. And the black represents the vasculatures that we want to avoid. And what you're seeing is these hash marked with numbers that
They
represents
showed
where we
monkeys
intend to
earlier,
put each
Tim.
of our threads. So should we see some insertions? So this is another view real quick. On the left is the view of the insertion area. And on the right, what the robot's going to do is it's going to peel the array, the threads, one by one from its silicon backing and insert it into the targets that we predetermined in the targeting view. So
Is this live?
there you go. That's the first insertion.
I think this is live.
So we're going to see a couple more insertions. The whole process of inserting about 64 threads in our first product is going to be around 15 minutes for this robot. So yeah, there's a second one that went in, and we're going to do a third one. There you go. And then that's going to go in the background, and we'll come back to it in the later part of the presentation.
I see. That is live.
And as Elon mentioned, we've been working very hard to go from prototype to building product. As part of this, one of the things that we did is to move our device manufacturing to a dedicated facility in Austin for scale-up manufacturing. And what's important to highlight, and is evident in this clip, is that it's very typical for us to have our engineers who design also work on the physical manufacturing line to build and debug. And this has been extremely, extremely critical in reducing our iteration cycle time. And we've also scaled up our surgery. So we now have a dedicated, our own OR, in fact, a double OR in Austin. And this is just a stepping stone before we eventually build our own Neuralink clinic. So with this product, N1 and R1, our initial goal is to help people with paralysis from complete spinal cord injury regain their digital freedom by enabling them to use their devices as good as, if not better, than they could before the injury. And as Elon mentioned, over the last year, this has been the central focus of the company. And we've been working very closely with the FDA to get approval and to launch our first in-human clinical trial in the US, hopefully in the next 6 months. So hopefully this gives you a good overview of our product. For the next hour, we're going to go through a deep technical dive on these topics to tell you about our technical challenges,
in for the long haul,
share some of our progress, and preview what's coming next. So with that, over to Nir from my team, who's going to talk to you about neural decoding.
Thank you, DJ. And hey, everyone. My name is Nir Evan-Chen, and I'm the head of Brain Interfaces Applications. Our goal is to enable someone with paralysis control a computer, as well as me, or even better.
Yeah, talking about
We'd
permits.
like to provide
Yes.
fast and accurate control with all the functionality of computers that works anytime, anywhere.
They're trying to get
So I'm very excited
clinical
to show
testing
you how we're using
for
the
this.
N1 device with our software and algorithms to achieve this. Last year, we shared with you a video of Pager the monkey controlling a computer cursor with his brain. So how do we do that? Just a brief reminder. First, we record his neural activity from the motor cortex using the N1 device. We can record from over thousands of channels while he's playing with the joystick. Then we can train a neural net that predicts the cursor velocity from the patterns of his neural activity. With this decoder, he can then control a cursor just by thinking about it, without even moving the joystick. He can play with this decoder.
He's moving his hand. He's not moving the joystick, that's true, but he's still moving his hand.
A variety of games, also a grid task, where he's moving the white dot towards the yellow target. Every time he gets one, he receives a drop of his favorite smoothie. And he chooses to play this game every day. Here you can see his performance from early 2021, around the time we released the previous demo. It's quite accurate, but it's a bit slower than what we would like. And cursor control is the foundation for interacting with most computer applications. So since then, we've been working to improve cursor speed and accuracy. As you can see, it's much, much faster, almost twice as fast. Yeah.
That's impressive.
However, it's still a bit slower than what I can do. So we are working on creative ways to improve that. Now, speed is not enough. You want a full set of functionalities. And for decades, most software was built for mouse and keyboard control. And it doesn't make sense to reinvent this entire ecosystem for brain control, at least for now. So we are working and we are designing mouse and keyboard interfaces for the brain. The way we do that is by training Pager and his friends on a variety of computer tasks, and then designing algorithms to predict their behavior. Here you can see a few examples of tasks in different phases of monkey training. For example, left and right click and drag, cursor typing, swipe typing, handwriting, and even hand gestures. Now, interacting with computer is bidirectional, and feedback is very important. Unlike when I click on a button and I can physically feel the button being pressed, when a potential N1 user will attempt to click, they won't be able to feel it. An example of how we are addressing that is by providing a real-time visual feedback that represents the strength of the neural click by changing the color of the cursor. Just by typing on a physical keyboard is much faster and easier than typing on an iPad keyboard. This will make the brain control much faster and easier to use. Typing, one of the most important functionalities. So you already seen this message, and I want to show you the behind the scene of how this message was created. And here you can see again Saki using the virtual keyboard, typing this message. This virtual keyboard is similar to the one I use on my phone. And with the speed and accuracy that we achieved so far, typing on a virtual keyboard is already fast and easy. However, I never use a virtual keyboard when I type on my computer, because it covers my screen, and it's also much slower than what I can do with my 10 fingers. We can do better. For example, a group from Stanford asked a person to imagine handwriting letters.
Oh.
Then they decoded the letters from his brain activity. Using this approach, they were able to speed up the typing.
Monkey
rates.
juice.
I
know, we all want one.
But of course, they don't know how to write. So to
I would get a lot more work
we
done
train Ranger, one
if
of
I had a
our
tube that I could just
favorite monkeys, to
get
place digits
juice
on an iPad.
every time
Here
I
you
did
can
a
see
little
tracing
task.
the digit 5 and the digit 2. Then we recorded his neural activity with the N1 device. But now, instead of decoding the cursor velocity,
I should do this
we
for my
decode in real
students.
time the digit that he's tracing on the screen. We had two main takeaways from this project. One, that monkeys are awesome and can learn very, very complex tasks. The second one, that although it can increase the typing rate, it requires hundreds of examples and samples of each of the digits and the characters we wanted to classify. This would not scale. The way we are solving that is by indirection. Instead of decoding directly the digits, we first decode the hand trajectory of on the screen. And then, when we decoded the hand trajectory, we can use any off-the-shelf handwriting classifier to predict the digit and the characters. For example, classifiers that are trained on an MNIST dataset. Why it's so important? It's important because now we can potentially decode any character in any language with only one neural decoder for hand trajectory. It means that you can write in English, Hebrew, Mandarin, or even monkey language, and we can understand you wanted a banana. So there are many challenges ahead of us to improve functionality and speed. And I want to hand it off to Bliss to talk about the third part, how we are making our brain interfaces work anytime, anywhere.
That's interesting. I mean, these are the
Hello, everyone.
These are the scientists. They're being they're practical. They're not talking about. Tim, you missed this, and if anyone is catching this in the middle, Elon started talking about why he's doing the whole Neuralink thing, and it's to fight against a potential super AI in the future, or if we have a benevolent AI, it is to interact with that benevolent AI. Okay, but these are the scientists. They're practical. I mean, these are this show and tell. They've each got their own specialty that they're working on, and there's some interesting advancements here. And for people that are completely new to this kind of brain-machine interface, I mean, this is pretty exciting stuff. For people who are familiar with this, there's not like a ton that's new here. I think that like this isn't necessarily like stuff that isn't also being worked on in other labs. But you know, like there's I can appreciate the work that these guys are doing. Like Elon's just full of it. Okay, let's go back.
My name is Bliss, and I'm a software engineer here at Neuralink. When I use my computer, my mouse and keyboard work how I intend them to, at least like 99.9999% of the time. My goal is to enable a user with paralysis to control their computer as reliably as I can. Here's what we want that experience to feel like. In this video, you can see Saki walking over to his MacBook and choosing to work on his typing task. The entire decoding system works out of the box, and it feels totally plug and play. The first step to achieving this kind of high reliability is to test extensively offline. A typical flow for using the N1 link is to connect over Bluetooth, stream out neural activity from the brain, and then use that neural activity to train decoders and do real-time inference. We've built a simulation for exactly this sequence, but instead of using a monkey with an implant, we use a simulated brain that injects synthetic neural activity into an implant sitting in a server rack. From the point of view of that implant, it's in a real brain. This simulation runs on every code commit to validate that from the hardware all the way up through to the neural decoders, our entire stack can achieve state-of-the-art performance. However, while this kind of simulation is great for integration testing of software and hardware, it's not yet detailed enough to guarantee high reliability in the real world. In the real world, the underlying signals we're trying to decode actually change day to day. In this plot, you can see the average firing rate detected on a representative channel of Saki's implant. Each bar represents 1 day, and you can see that each day has a different average firing rate than the previous.
Okay. -2 hertz? How does it have negative? So the firing rate, hertz. That means it's firing once per second, twice per second. And this is one single channel in this monkey called Sake. How does it get negative? Okay, that doesn't make sense to me. A neuron fires or it doesn't. If it doesn't fire, that means the firing rate is 0. How do you get a negative firing rate? I don't know. Yeah, reverse in time. Anti-action potentials, maybe, which is not a thing. Okay, I don't know.
This presents us with a very interesting problem for how to make our decoders robust.
Okay, maybe what this is, now that I'm looking at it, all these histogram, the bars here, I guess this is a goofy way to present this, but it looks like they maybe have taken an average firing rate, and that this is actually change in firing rate relative to average. So this is not average firing rate. This is wrong. This is change in firing rate relative to average. So some days this channel is firing less than the average, and some days it's firing more than the average. I'm guessing. Yeah, and the middle is baseline. Well, no. So yeah, the average. So this would be like if we're looking at this bar or this bar, this would be basically the average. This one is essentially the average. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's what that is.
Day to day. It can actually happen that if you train a neural decoder on 1 day of data and then try to use it on the next, the average firing rates can actually shift enough to cause a bias in the output of the model. Here on the right, you can see that this bias is making it hard for the cursor to move to the upper right corner. You see it struggling here to make it up to the upper right, and then it moves much more effortlessly down to the bottom left. We're trying many approaches to mitigate this problem. Some examples include building models on large data sets of many days of data to try to find patterns of neural activity that are stable across days. Another approach we're trying is to continuously sample statistics of neural activity on the implant and use the latest estimates to pre-process the data before feeding it into the model. This is really an active area of research for the team, and it's a critical problem to solve if we want to enable someone with paralysis to control their computer as well as I can.
That's interesting. So they obviously have come up with a problem with this prosthetic or the Neuralink, and they're trying to solve it using just a fictitious, computer-generated neural output that will probably generate some kind of bias. And now they're trying to train the decoder or identify the bias as it changes from day to day so that it can do the cursor finding a little bit better, is my guess. So this is all in silico. This doesn't involve any, monkeys or actual neural activity. This is all fake neural activity. And then they're just trying to improve their overall computer programming to deal probably with an issue that they're finding with the monkeys.
Another big problem we have is to minimize the time it takes for a spike in the brain to impact the movement of the cursor on the screen. If you have lag or jitter in this control loop, the cursor becomes hard to control, leading to the kinds of overshoots that you can see here on the right. One big improvement we've made towards in this direction is called phase lock. Phase lock aligns the edge of each packet that we send off the implant to the exact moment that the Bluetooth radio is going to wake up. This minimizes the time it takes for a spike in the brain to be incorporated into the prediction of our neural network. Here you can see the latency distribution after phase lock. Not only has the mean been greatly reduced, but the variance has been reduced as well. This makes it easier for the user to predict the behavior of their cursor. Over the last year, we've made tremendous improvements to the stability and reliability of our system. And we've been able to demonstrate consistent high performance across many sessions and many months. However, there's still a long road ahead of us before the system will truly feel plug and play. So if solving the hard problems required to ship this technology is exciting to you, you should consider applying to join the team. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Avinash to talk about how our custom low-power ASIC detects spikes in the brain.
They show, Tim, I don't know if you saw it or if you're just joking,
Hi,
but they did
I'm
Pong
Avinash,
earlier.
one of the engineers on the ASIC team. We designed the custom neural sensors, which include both analog and digital circuitry, to record and stimulate across 1,024 independent channels. We faced challenges across all three major metrics: performance, power, and area. Not only do we have to fit all 1024 channels into a single quarter-sized implant, but we also have to measure spiking activity less than 20 microvolts in amplitude. And today, I'd like to focus on the last challenge I mentioned, power. Power consumption is important to us because we want to give future users a full day of use of their implant without any interruption for charging. Back in 2018, we were sending every sample from every channel off the device for processing, which burned a ton of power. In 2020, we brought spike detection onto the chip. As you may know, neurons transmit information by firing. So simply monitoring for these spikes and only sending these spike events off the implant acts as a very efficient form of compression. And over the past 2 years, we've continued to make optimizations within the ASIC, dropping the total system power consumption down to just 32.
So this is interesting. I mean, basically right now, from my understanding, the way that this typically gets done is that, if we go back just a hair, a lot of these microarrays, the way it works is that you have a readout of every single neuron while it's firing and decoding of whatever activity that you're seeing, the computer analyzing the neural activity to try to make a decision about what actually is happening within the neural network. That's all done in a computer outside of the person or animal. And so, and what the point that he's making is that, okay, a lot of that information that's coming out is really unimportant information. Like you got to be able to read when the spikes are happening, and really all that you really need to know is when the spikes are actually happening and the relevant spikes. So why not instead of sending that information off of the chip, and so constantly broadcasting information out, which is going to be a lot of power use, why not do that on the chip itself so that you don't have to send all that information out? You do some of the decoding on the chip that's implanted on the skull so that you're not using so much bandwidth to broadcast that information. So yeah, that makes sense.
Sending every sample from every channel off the device for processing detection. So simply monitoring for these spikes and only sending these spike events off the implant acts as a very efficient form of compression. And over the past 2 years, we've continued to make optimizations within the ASIC, dropping the total system power consumption down to just 32 milliwatts and doubling battery life. Let's take a look at our on-chip spike detection algorithm, which makes our battery-powered implants possible. We first start by applying a 500 Hz to 5 kHz bandpass filter to remove noise that's out of band. Next, we use an estimate of the noise floor to generate an adaptive threshold per channel. And finally, our spike detector module identifies 3 key points of a spike. Identifying 3 points allows us to detect not just the presence of a spike, but the shape of a spike as well. This can be extremely important for distinguishing between multiple neurons adjacent to a single channel.
Yeah, So this is all important stuff. So this is essentially like what an action potential could look like if you're recording in a particular format. You have this deflection and membrane potential that you're detecting. And it's essentially, even though it's chemical, it is electrical. And you can detect that with an electrode array. So they have this 1024 electrode array. But the thing is, every single electrode, it could potentially pick up more than one neuron. And this is an issue. This is always an issue with electrode arrays. And so you want to make sure that if you're recording from one neuron or multiple neurons in a given electrode point, you can do this sort of spike sorting segregation. None of this is new. This has always been a problem for this kind of recording for decades.
Today, I'd like to focus on one of the many optimizations that we've made in our latest chip. This one specifically cutting system power by 15%. Note that neurons spike relatively infrequently, which means that our spike detector spends a lot of time searching for the first point of a spike and very little time searching for the other 2 points of a spike that only occur after the threshold is crossed. We can use this characteristic of the input waveform to reduce memory accesses within the chip by 30%. Let's take a look at how that works. Our spike detector is implemented as a single functional unit that's shared across all channels with an SRAM to buffer the state of each channel. As a sample comes in, its channel state is read from SRAM, an incremental spike detection step is run, and then the updated state is written back to SRAM. Since this is happening 20 million times per second across the implant, each of these accesses add up quite quickly. In our latest chip, we split the state into 2 parts, a hot state and a cold state. The hot state is accessed on every cycle, while the cold state is only accessed once the threshold is crossed, reducing the average access width and saving power. We're also working on a next-generation stimulation-focused chip with 4,096 channels still within the footprint of our current chips. In addition to increasing the channel count, we're also increasing the drive voltage so we can get better activation per channel. And to support this higher channel count, as well as a broad range of future applications that you'll soon hear about, we're adding an ARM core onto the chip. And finally, since these chips are the same size as our current chips, we can still put 4 of them together into a single implant for a total of 16,000 channels still within the size of a quarter.
I don't know what current technology is for other groups. 16,000 is a lot. That's not, so basically this means that they could potentially record the activity of upwards of around 16,000 different neurons at the same time. More neurons means more information that your decoder can use to read out and then get information to then control devices, for instance. And you could probably get greater precision with more neurons to look at, for instance. Some of that makes sense, but one thing though is that the brain has 86 billion neurons, and this, despite stupid movies like Lucy, no, it's not a recording. This is live, but I'm pausing it because I want to talk about stuff. I'm analyzing this. I'm not just going to play their corporate propaganda. So I'm putting in my color. Okay, so 16,000 channels means 16,000 neurons. The human brain has 86 billion neurons. So several orders of magnitude, many orders of magnitude more than just 16,000. And the activity of all those neurons is important. We're not using just 10% of our brain. That stupid movie Lucy isn't true. Okay, so we actually, you need the activity. If you're going to try to read activity across the entire brain, do you necessarily have to record every single neuron? No, I wouldn't say that. I imagine there's probably quite a bit that you can intuit from recording a subset. But the brain, like I said, it's highly modular. If you're going to record from just the motor cortex, well, you're now sort of getting information related to motor output, which is not negligible, especially for someone, say, who's quadriplegic. That can be enormously helpful because now you're going to bypass the part of the brain that is damaged, the spinal cord, right? So you can take the part of the brain that still works, which is the motor cortex, and try to feed that information to those motor units in the spinal cord to make the muscles move. And you have to decode that information. So I can see Neuralink being used for that. The thing is, like, there's a lot more neurons than just even 16,000. So, I mean, it's cool to get even more resolution. I'm not entirely sure if even this is enough to really do too much with it. I don't know. I mean, maybe if they can sort of spread the electrodes out throughout many parts of the brain, and then you have just a single neural leak, I suppose that could do it. I could also imagine that being very damaging to the brain. All right, let's go back to this.
As you can see, we've been working very hard to improve the power consumption within the implant. But we've also been working very hard to improve the charging experience of the implant, which Matt will talk about. But first, the robot has just completed inserting all 64 threads. So let's take a look.
Okay. So this is the electrode arrays being added by the robot.
This is a view of the insertion site, similar to the one that DJ showed you earlier. But instead of the targeting reticles, if you look closely, you can see that all 64 threads, each carrying 16 electrodes, have been inserted into the brain proxy while avoiding vasculature, and all just within the past 20 minutes. Let's hand it over to Matt now to continue the technical deep dive.
Hi, I'm Matt, head of Brain Interfaces Electrical Engineering. Our fully implantable N1 device depends on a battery for continuous operation. When that battery is running low, charging is accomplished through wireless power transfer. However, unlike many consumer electronic devices, which can simply offer a physical connector, charging a fully implantable device poses several unique challenges. First, the system must operate over a wide charging volume without relying on magnets for perfect alignment. The system must be robust to disturbance and complete quickly so as not to be overly burdensome. However, most important is safety. In contact with brain tissue, the outer surface of the implant must not rise more than 2 degrees C.
Don't want to cook the brain. That is a good point.
In pursuit of these goals, our charging system has gone through several engineering iterations. The first, if you watched our pig demo in August of 2020,
and then you can heat up your
was implanted
feet
with a version of the N1
with the batteries as they warm up when you charge them.
This device was
on
implemented in a small puck package and later separated into a remote coil and battery base. This charger was challenging to use. However, we learned a lot through its implementation.
Okay.
Our current production charger, which charges our current generation of implants, is implemented in an aluminum battery base, which also includes the drive circuitry.
How do they do this
remote
with the
coil,
monkeys?
4 times the size of our original device, also disconnectable. This remote coil
you don't want to eat cooked
increased
brain.
Switching frequency, driving improved coil coupling. This charger is in use today, including several applications within our engineering and animal test facilities. I'd like to show you one of these applications here with a device we call our simple charger. And the coil has been embedded into the habitat. With the addition of one new outer control loop plus a banana smoothie pump, the troop has been trained to charge themselves. So let's see how Pager charges his implant.
Okay.
On the right, we're streaming real-time diagnostics from Pager's N1. When he climbs up and sits below the coil, you can see the charger automatically detect his presence and transition from searching to charging. We see the regulated power output on a scale of 0 to 1 and the current driven into his battery.
Okay. Stable temperature. I mean, there are ways around all this. Yeah, first, I wouldn't want to cook my brain, but if it just means sitting on a stick, I'd get a
high-quality
smoothie for
factor
that.
coils
As long as it didn't cook my brain.
exhibit good charging performance over relatively larger distances, but as they're brought closer to the implant, what you see is a peak splitting effect, where the generation charger.
Okay, what is this guy doing?
Thank you very much, Matt. My name is Julian, and I lead the embedded software group on the Brain Interfaces team. So when we started building implants, we had a small manufacturing line, and to collect data from an implant, you would manually walk over with your laptop, you would connect, and collect the data of interest. But our goal is to make an ultra-safe and ultra-reliable implant. And so to do this, we scaled up the manufacturing line, our testing throughput, and data collection capabilities. So firstly, we added a large suite of acceptance tests to the manufacturing line. These test the function and
this is boring.
Or updates.
Boring.
For these systems, we're testing claims.
I don't find any of this interesting.
How we spike the system is 1/5 to have a person capture all of its vital signs and commit those to flash. And then upon next connection with one of our recording stations, it will stream that data off. So for instance, if we look at our original implementation of doing these impedance scans, it took 4 hours to get through all 1,000 channels. But by parallelizing the tests, downsampling, filtering, and then reducing the amount of information we have to stream off the device by moving a lot of the calculation to the firmware side, we're now able to scan all 1,000 channels in just 20 seconds. This means that we can run impedance on every implant every day.
So,
and then our internal dashboards can play back a history
evaluating
of
the
this impedance
implants to make
so
sure
we
that
can
they're
get
working the way that
really
they're
good
supposed to be doing,
quantitative
or if they have to
insight
make
into
changes.
that interface between biology and electronics.
Okay.
At scale to rapidly increase our pace of iteration. Even better, the system also significantly reduces the amount of tests which require animal models, both for implant prototypes and, of course, longevity testing. So how does the system work? Well, at a very basic level, it comes down to 3 things. First, we want to mimic the internal chemistry of tissue. Next, we want to accelerate these chemical interactions as well as diffusion with our implant materials. And finally, we want to aggressively cycle the internal electronics of our implant. With these things, primarily the first 2, we have achieved a conservative 4x acceleration factor by the Arrhenius relationship. In other words, every day our implants spend in our accelerated system is equivalent to at least 4 days spent in vivo.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Historically, one of our greatest challenges has been the battle against moisture ingress into our implants. So we continuously monitor the internal humidity.
Moisture ingress. Everyone struggles with this. I certainly struggle with moisture ingress.
To watch for abnormal rise. Here, in white, you can see some internal humidity data from implants in some of our animals for the duration of over 1 year. As you can see, our internal humidity sensing is so sensitive, it can even detect the very small and slow humidity rise just from diffusion through our implant materials. Now, in blue, you can see that same internal humidity data, but from devices in our accelerated system.
Okay, so accelerated system, this is an artificial system to avoid having to do some of this work in animals. Let's create artificial systems to just sort of push to see how long it takes for the system to sort of degrade and lose its efficacy. This all makes sense. I think that's neat. Let's take a look, see what this is.
Started building the first system prototype just after the COVID shutdown had begun in early 2020. So we had to get a little creative. As you can see, our first system prototype was a little scrappy and operated out of one of our apartments, as indicated by the carpeting. Although scrappy, the system allowed us the fastest path to start testing our devices, tuning our working fluid chemistry, and checking our constraints. We also immediately started root causing observed failures in early implant prototypes, fed that information into the next prototype designs, and literally rinsed and repeated.
Yeah, wax on, wax
Over the
off.
duration of just a few months, the system was built out totally custom and highly iterated with 2 system versions and countless minor iterations.
Okay, so they're controlling like
leading us to
pressure
our
and
currently
temperature.
operated 3rd generation system, which achieves high density testing with automatic in-vessel charging as well as automatic data collection. The system also features an implant sled assembly.
Okay, let's skip ahead. All right, that's neat. Wait,
Thanks, Josh.
having to do this work in animals.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine. lead of the surgery engineering team. To get an N1 device, it's essentially these steps: targeting and the incision,
There we go.
drill
This
the
is the good stuff.
craniectomy, remove the tough outer meningeal layer called the dura, then insert the thin, flexible threads of electrodes, place the implant into the hole we created, and then that's it. You've got an implant under the skin. Look, Ma, no wires. Just kidding. I mean, seriously, no wires, but I don't actually have one. The surgical robot does the thread insertion part of the surgery.
She doesn't do it. It's
This
the
is because
it's
it
the
would be
Portal
very
2
difficult
robot
to
that
do
does
manually. Imagine taking a hair from your head and trying to stick it into Jello covered by Saran wrap, and doing this at a precise depth and position, and doing this 64 times within a reasonable amount of time. And a neurosurgeon would probably not like it very much if we asked them to do this for the surgery. So we have the robot that you saw doing its tiny dance. I sort of wanted to call it Tiny Dancer, but it's called R1, which is also great. The rest of the surgery is done by the neurosurgeon. In order for us to make an accessible and affordable procedure, we need to revisit this. I'll tell you why. When I was in school, my dad lost the ability to walk and to use his arms and even to speak. He was diagnosed with ALS. We would look on the internet and you could see maybe one person here or there who had some cool custom robotic assistive device, but it was deeply frustrating how limited were the options available to him. And there's hundreds of thousands of people with paresis, not even counting people with other conditions that our device might be able to help. Meanwhile, there's not that many neurosurgeons, maybe about 10 per million people. And it takes about a decade or more to train a neurosurgeon, and they're already generally very busy. And as you can imagine, their time is very expensive. So in order for us to do the most good and have an affordable and accessible procedure, we need to figure out how one neurosurgeon could oversee many procedures at the same time. This might sound sort of crazy, but probably so did laser eye surgery before LASIK made it normal. LASIK's been around for about 30 years and counting. In the beginning, the laser robot did just the most fundamental core part that it had to do, and the surgeon did the rest. And over the iterations, the surgeon has to do less and less, and the laser robot does most of it. And it's a highly compelling procedure. It takes just a handful of minutes and often gives life-changing results. Since I joined in 2017, we've also done a handful of iterations to optimize the thread insertions of the robot. One of the challenges that we've had to face has to do with the optomechanical packaging. So as you can see here, there's about 3 primary optical paths that are really valuable for us to have reliable thread insertions. One is the visible imaging of the needle inserting the thread.
Threads.
And then another is the laser interferometry system called OCT, optical coherence tomography, that gives us the precise position of the brain while it's moving in real time. And then also we have to provide lighting and illumination to see what's going on in the visible light camera. And doing all this where the needle is at the bottom of the craniectomy, especially when it's close to the skull wall, can be pretty difficult to fit everything and be able to see it. So the way that the team solved this is by putting all 3 of these optical paths into one optical stack using photon magic or polarization, whatever you want to call it. And that enables us to do vessel avoidance in real time. So as I mentioned, the brain is moving, and where we place targets in the beginning may not be where you want to insert at the moment the needle is going down there. So the robot can actually detect the vessels and then determine if we're going to insert onto a vessel or not, if it's safe to insert, and then that way we can avoid inserting onto major vessels. And that brings us to the robot that we have here today.
Yeah.
There's still a lot for us to do to get to that procedure where we reduce the role of the neurosurgeon and make it affordable and accessible. The 2 elements of the surgery that demand the most skills from the neurosurgeon are the craniectomy and the directomy. Alex and Sam are going to tell you a bit more about how we think we can get rid of the directomy step. So that leaves the craniectomy.
What?
In neurosurgery, if your craniectomy is small enough, you can use a standard tool called a perforator, which makes quick work of this job. But for a larger craniectomy, the surgeon has to rely on their skill in order to accommodate the variability patient to patient in skull thickness, skull hardness. Even within the same patient, in the same craniectomy, you can have different skull thicknesses, for example. In addition, if we can make something that has a very high precision craniectomy, we can open the design space for future ways of mounting the implant to the skull.
So she's making a point related to something that I have kind of thought about with Neuralink. One thing about the brain, she pointed out, like, there's variability in skull thickness across individuals, and even within an individual, different parts of the skull are going to be thicker than in other parts. And it's true. The thing about the brain, I've been talking about how it's very modular, that we have like a motor cortex, we got a somatosensory cortex, we got a visual cortex, we have language processing areas. The thing about that is that it's not necessarily exactly the same in every single individual. There is some subtle variation that can occur, especially when you're talking about more complicated areas of the brain, such as language processing. So some of the language areas, so like Broca's area and Wernicke's area, these are very well-known areas. They're very important for language comprehension and production. We've done a number of studies trying to identify these areas in humans. Like they'll have surgery, open up the head, and we can do experiments to kind of see, well, which areas are Broca's area, which areas are Wernicke's area. And you can always find areas of the brain that are involved in language processing in every single human, but precisely where it's located in every single brain actually varies quite a bit from individual to individual. I'll look for the slide for that while we're watching this.
So I'll show you a few of our prototypes. Ultrasonic cutters, like what's on the screen, and oscillating cutters have the benefit of not cutting soft tissue. You can cut the bone and not the brain. But however, as you can see here, our ultrasonic cutter prototype created quite a bit of heat to cut at the rate that we wanted. So onto the oscillating saw. Here we designed a blade to minimize cut time and also conducted sound and also heating. And as you can see, you can cut through hard things like bone, but not soft things like skin. It's simple and it works. However, if you wanted to cut an arbitrary depth or arbitrary shape, the oscillating saw just won't cut it. I was afraid no one would get it. You guys are smart. There's a time-tested solution for drilling arbitrary shapes, which is a CNC drill. The challenge with us doing this on a person is that we need to make sure it cuts reliably every single time, doesn't cut too deep. And a few ways that we're using feedback
I need you here to do my production.
The brain are force feedback and also impedance. And if I could get a volunteer, no, just kidding. Maybe next time. But yeah, so this is some insight into some of the things we're working on to make an accessible and affordable procedure. And now Alex is going to tell you a bit about our next generation developments.
It wasn't that exciting. It was just basically like a Dremel tool cutting a hole.
Now that we've covered the technology and surgical process for a current device, we'd like to cover some of our next generation development projects. I and the next couple speakers would like to talk about one of those projects, which is enabling device upgradability. You've gotten to hear about the advancements we've made over the past year. We've improved implant robustness, battery and charging performance, Bluetooth usability. Realistically, every new device version is going to be significantly better. It'll be more functional, it'll last longer.
This is what I was talking about with variability. So these are some of the language areas. Okay, this is from my slides on language. And so here we have Broca's area. This is involved in language production. This is Wernicke's area that's involved in language comprehension. Motor cortex obviously is necessary for language production because you have to be able to move your lips, your tongue, your vocal cords. All of that is coordinated by the motor cortex as well as your respiratory muscles. And obviously premotor cortex, some of the planning is involved in using the premotor cortex. There's auditory cortex that's involved because speaking also involves like the feedback of listening to you speak. So, but this figure here, what they're showing here is data from 117 patients on areas that were involved in language processing. And so every single dot is that they found that this area was involved in language processing, and this is the number of patients out of 117 that it was involved. And you can see not a single one of them has more than 100. In fact, the highest is 79, this spot here. And so this is like classically Broca's area. And like this spot, for instance, only 18 patients out of 117, like this affected language processing. And Wernicke's area, again, like we call this Wernicke's area because it's like critical for language comprehension. People who have damage to this area, they have complete comprehension deficits. And you can see any one spot, like it wasn't even really more than a third of the patients that had deficits. So there's huge variability. So every person's going to have like a Wernicke's area, but precisely where it's located in the brain varies. And so that's going to be a problem with Neuralink if you think like, oh, we're just going to put it into their Wernicke's area. Well, you got to figure out where the Wernicke's area is in each individual because it's going to vary. So I don't know if they're thinking about this. I assume they are. But if they're not hiring that many neuroscientists, maybe they're not. I don't know. Okay.
We need to keep this new technology accessible for our early adopters. This means that we need a solution to make device upgrade or replacement just as easy as it is to initially install.
Okay,
as
so this is the
many
upgrading
medical
part.
device companies have found, this is a challenging problem. The body's healing response doesn't make this easy, so this isn't solved yet. But we've made significant progress towards enabling this that we'd like to cover today. Now, we'll have to start with some background as to what makes device upgrade challenging. And we'll start with the anatomy. Under the skin, you have the skull. Below that, the dura, a tough membrane that separates the bone from the brain. And between the dura and the brain, you have the pia arachnoid complex, a fluid-filled suspension for the brain. To install the device, the surgeon removes a disc of skull and dura to expose the brain surface. The device then replaces the removed material. The challenge is here at this interface. Over months, all empty volume is filled by tissue, encapsulating the device and the threads. The device would be trivially easy to remove. Because of the thread's small size, they would slip right out of the brain. It's the tissue layer that forms above the surface that makes the removal challenging. We built tools in-house to study this response and characterize it, such as histology and micro-CT. In these images, you can see that layer of tissue that has formed above the surface, encapsulating the threads and adhering to the surrounding tissue. We've explored many different avenues for designing around this healing process and finding a solution to make device upgrade seamless. Our best successes have come from making the procedure less invasive. Instead of directly exposing the brain's surface, we instead keep the dura in place, maintaining the body's natural protective barrier. This prevents encapsulation at the brain's surface. And really, this is actually a huge win for making the surgery simpler and safer, as Christine alluded to. However, this doesn't come for free. The dura is a very tough, opaque membrane. As you can see in these SEM images, it's composed of a dense network of collagen fibers. These offer an array of technical challenges for inserting our electrodes. One of those challenges is imaging through the dura. As you can see on the left, our current custom optical systems offer pretty incredible capabilities for imaging the exposed brain surface. However, as you can see on the right, once the dura is in place, you can't see the dense vasculature at the brain surface. The dura is in the way. There's simply too much attenuation. To solve this problem, we're developing a new optical system that uses a medical standard fluorescent dye to image vessels underneath the tissue. Here, you can see that dye perfusing through the vessels, highlighting them. There's still a lot of engineering work to go to prove accuracy and repeatability of this system. But once that's done, this will allow us to target and avoid blood vessels underneath the dura.
I'm going to get a job at Neuralink.
We're also exploring applying our laser imaging system to deeper tissue structures. In the bottom left, you can see a section of the tissue layers underneath the dura. This image is compiled from multiple volumes from our optical coherence tomography system. You can see the collage of those volumes above. In the future, these new systems, when combined with correlation to pre-op imaging, such as MRI, will enable precise targeting without directly exposing the brain surface. Now, imaging isn't the only challenge that comes with the tough dural anatomy. Now, I'd like to hand it over to Sam to talk about some of the challenges of inserting our electrodes through this membrane.
All right, that's interesting. I mean, it certainly is a challenge to try to get through the
Thanks,
dura.
Alex. Hey, I'm Sam, and I lead the needle manufacturing and design team.
Whoa, this is
So,
like a young
as Alex mentioned,
Weird Al
the same
Yankovic.
properties of the dura that make it a good protector of the brain also make it really difficult for us to insert the threads into. In humans, the
Imagine he's going to come out with an accordion.
dura can be over 1 millimeter in thickness, which doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to our 40-micron needles, it actually is a lot. For example, if you scaled up the needles to the size of a pencil, the dura would scale to over 4 inches in thickness. Take a look at how far you have to zoom in to even see it. By the time the features of the needle come into frame, you could see individual red blood cells in the same frame. This is just wait. This is a real-life SEM image of our latest design. On the left there, you can see the end of the thread. In the middle is the needle, and on the right is actually a piece of my hair. So yeah, it's extremely small. Besides being really small, there's a lot of challenges associated with designing this. One challenge is that we have to use the needle and the protective cannula that it sits in to grab onto the thread and to hold it while we peel it from this protective silicon backing. And then we have to keep holding it while we bring it over to the surface and then release it from the cannula during insertions. Another challenge is that the brain is really soft beneath the tough dura. And so if the needle isn't sharp enough, it'll just keep dimpling the surface without puncturing. And if this free length gets too long, it can actually just buckle the needle like this. Another challenge is that we don't just have to get the needle through, we have to get the thread through as well. So we really have to focus on optimizing the combined profile of the needle and thread together. And these are just some of the challenges associated with designing something like this. And so far we found that the key to solving this problem has been improving on our speed of iteration. But let's look at how we make these things in the first place. So we start with a length of 40 micron wire made out of tungsten and alloyed with a little bit of rhenium for added ductility. We designed this femtosecond laser mill in-house to cut the features of the needle and cannula. And it can do this with sub-micron precision. We spent a lot of time this year turning this thing from a science project into an industrial system. Just a couple months ago, it took a skilled operator 22 minutes to make a needle. And even a skilled operator could only get about 58% yield. Today, that same process takes just 6 minutes, and anyone can get 91% yield with just a few minutes of training. With only one click, the mill cuts and measures the needle and cannula and uploads the measurements to our limb system so that the robot...
Okay, one issue. I mean, that's cool. That's awesome. The femtosecond laser, though, those typically cost around $150,000, just the laser itself. It wouldn't include everything else. Maybe more than that. They're expensive.
Robots can use the exact dimensions for each needle that it uses. Now, this is all for our current design, though, and we've had a couple years to optimize the manufacturing process of it. The current design has served us well so far, but it doesn't quite protect the thread well enough to get through the tough dura. So, like I said, we had to come up with something new, and we needed to be able to iterate on designs quickly. Unsurprisingly, there's no page in machinery's handbook for this kind of thing, so we dug into the science of femtosecond laser ablation and figured out a workflow that allows us to use our laser mill much like a CNC mill. This allows us to iterate several times. This allows us to iterate in under an hour for new designs, allowing several iterations per day when we're really on a roll. As a result, the latest design, seen on the right, can actually insert through 9 layers of dura, totaling
it won't be terribly
3
scalable.
millimeters on the bench top.
Femtosecond lasers are not
we could ever expect
rare.
from a human with
You can buy them, but they're pretty expensive. That's just the laser part.
The needle isn't the only part of the puzzle, though. As you can imagine, all of these designs here work with different threads. So we need a way to iterate on that as well. And we do this by having our microfabrication process here in-house. This summer, we completely rebuilt our clean room in about 9 weeks, which among other things, greatly reduced particulate counts, which allows yield and throughput to greatly increase. This, combined with all the other great improvements the microfab team has made, allows us to iterate on new designs in just a matter of days. The last piece of the puzzle, though, is testing. We can come up with as many new designs as we want, but unless we have a way to actually test them in the right conditions, we won't know what to tweak. Or even worse, we'll spend time optimizing for the wrong things. Take this failure mode, for example. A few months ago, we got to the point where we could pretty reliably insert through the Dura. But when we took the proxies and put them in our micro CT imaging, we realized that our hold on the end of the threads was actually too strong, and we were pulling them out just a little bit underneath the surface. By the time we solved the problem, we realized that this issue was very sensitive to the properties of the surrounding material or tissue. We could make a proxy where this never happens, and we could make another proxy where this happened every single time. And this highlights why it's crucial that we spend time making our benchtop tests match tissue as accurately as possible. And I'm going to pass it off to Leslie now, who's going to talk about how we've been doing that. Thanks.
Nice job, Weird Al.
Hi, I'm Leslie, and I lead microfabrication R&D. And part of what we're interested in is understanding the biological environment our implant and threads experience as they're fully installed in the body. Learning directly from biology, though, is inherently slow. So in order to move fast, we're developing synthetic materials that mimic the biological environment. This allows us to learn as much as we can on benchtop and start taking steps away from the industry standard of animal testing. Developing accurate proxies, though, is challenging. The implant environment is made up of many anatomical layers that all have unique properties. And as time goes on and the implant site heals, new tissue forms, filling any available space. In addition to that, motion related to cardiovascular activity and head movement introduce added complexity. So to start addressing some of these challenges, we're engineering materials using feedback from biology. This may involve mechanical characterization of tissue or analysis of interactions at thread-tissue interfaces. Much of this characterization is even done during surgery itself by using custom hardware and software that modifies our surgical robot to double up as a sensitive characterization tool. We then use the data collected and feed it back into optimizing our materials so that they behave mechanically, chemically, and as shown here, structurally, just like biology. We've come a long way from our humble first brain proxy, shown here sitting on a plate and consisting of agar and a parafilm sheet. And while simple, it allowed us to perfect robot insertions through countless benchtop tests. Today, our proxy is slightly more complex, where we've upgraded to a composite hydrogel-based brain proxy that better mimics the modulus of real human brain. We've also incorporated a Dura proxy and developed an injectable soft tissue proxy that so far has allowed us to perform benchtop mock explant testing. We have a super long wish list for our proxy of the future, but some of those items include a surgery proxy with integrated soft tissue, brain, bone, skin, or even a whole body, a brain proxy that simulates motion, vasculature, and electrophysiological activity, and a biological proxy to test biocompatibility and electrical stimulation. There's a ton of ongoing work getting us closer to our proxy of the future, including work on lab-grown cerebral organoids, as shown here. And all of this...
I'm sorry, you can't see it, but I'm rolling my eyes. I mean, this is good. Like, it's better to do this kind of testing in proxy artificial tissues, quote unquote, so that you don't have to, quote unquote, torture animals. There's a place for animal research, and obviously showing efficacy and safety in non-animal proxies is a better way to do that, right? Before you go on to animal models. I don't like cerebral organoids. So what this is, these are neurons grown in a dish, and the neurons aggregate into groups. Too many people sort of pretend that these are like little mini brains. I find them to be too highly artificial, and that generally expression of certain kinds of genes that you find in a cerebral organoid doesn't necessarily reflect what you typically see. So in like actual brain tissue. So anyway, but they're testing implants in their organoids, so I suppose that that's something, but it's not anything like putting it in the actual brain. I mean, this is like, it's basically pointless.
Will get us closer to a future where we learn more and iterate faster on benchtop and reduce our reliance on animal models, or even one day replace them completely. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dan, who will be presenting a very exciting next generation application. Thank you.
I mean, one thing is for sure, like half of this is about dealing with the issue of animal testing, because they got so much bad press about the monkeys. They had a high rate of monkey death in their monkey colony, their monkey troop. Yeah. So I can see that this is probably in response to that.
Thank you, Leslie. My name's Dan, and I came to work
Hi,
at
Dan.
Neuralink after following a career in visual neuroscience research. I was inspired to join this company because I saw in our device the potential to restore vision to people rendered blind by eye injury or disease. There are a number of particular characteristics of our device that make it uniquely suited to this application. Firstly, as well as being able to record from every channel, we can stimulate neural activity in the brain by injecting current through every channel. This is important because it allows us to bypass the eye and generate a visual image in the brain directly.
More kids being
Secondly,
run over than anticipated.
Our device can have an enormous number of electrodes. For a visual prosthesis, this is important because the more electrodes you can have, the higher density of an image you can create in the brain. Thirdly, thanks to our robot, we can insert these electrodes deeply into the brain. Now, this is an important thing for a visual prosthesis because the human visual cortex is buried deeply in a fold in the medial face of the brain called the calcarine sulcus. In this image, I've highlighted the calcarine sulcus in red in an MRI. It contains a map of the visual world, the visual field. It's about a surface area equal to a credit card on each side. And if you unfold it and flatten it, you see that the image is inverted, it's upside down. But more interestingly, it's distorted so that the central part of the visual field, the fixation point, is greatly magnified. So for example, if you look at this image of Lincoln, if you look directly into his right eye, everything to the left of that fixation point is directed to your right visual cortex, and everything to the right goes to your left visual cortex. His eye, even though it's very small in the image, is magnified in the brain to occupy nearly a quarter of the surface area of the visual cortex. Over the last half century, visual neuroscientists
there's a nice explanation of the fovea. So that's the center of our visual field. So if you're staring at Lincoln's eye right here, that you would have a magnification of that in the visual cortex. So obviously the visual cortex is going to have a map of the retina, but it's magnified in places. So the center of our vision takes up more real estate in the brain, as he pointed out. I thought that was a nice explanation. But of course, I think he's like a neuroscience professor, so and works on vision.
Have developed a profound understanding of visual processing in the brain. What's driven most of this research is recording from single cells in the cortex, usually of macaque monkeys. One of the seminal discoveries was that every cell in the visual cortex represents only a tiny part of the visual field. Your perception is made up of a mosaic of tiny receptive fields, each belonging to a single cell in your visual cortex. So if you record from one of these cells in a monkey, say in this location, you can find a very tiny region of the screen where a light stimulus will cause modulation of that neuron. Another location in visual cortex will have a location elsewhere on the screen, in this case in the lower visual field. These regions are called receptive fields. We've inserted our device into the visual cortex of 2 rhesus monkeys, whose names are Code and Dash. That means we can record...
They should have named them Hubel and Weasel. The 2 guys who basically discovered how the visual cortex is organized.
Activity from their visual cortex generated by their normal home environment as they roam around. But as we all know, monkeys love banana smoothie. That means we can easily teach them to fixate points on a screen and reward them. We can reward them very precisely because we can track the location of their eye using an infrared camera. One of the things this allows us to do is to plot the receptive fields for every neuron that we can record with a single device. Now, we do this by showing the animal a movie of random checkerboards whilst he fixates steadily on the screen. Then we take only the frames of the movie that generated a response in the cell and average them all together. This is a technique known as reverse correlation. It's generally used quite widely in visual neuroscience.
Tim, yes, he's happy. I mean, but if you had a tube like this that was giving you smoothie, you'd be happy too. Trust me.
For this purpose. And this is an example of a receptive field plotted with this technique. The central cross is the fixation point, and you can see the little red and blue regions of excitatory and inhibitory receptive field. These regions give cortical cells some of their characteristic properties. So we can record all the receptive fields from all the electrodes at the same time. And if we take all these receptive fields and accumulate them together, overlap them, and place them on a computer monitor for scale at a typical viewing distance, you begin to get an idea of how much of the visual field we can cover with this preliminary device. Many of the receptive fields are close to the fovea, close to the fixation point. That's partly due to the magnification that I talked about of the fovea. But there's also a scattering of fields in the periphery. These are from recording sites deeper in the brain, in the calcarine sulcus. So far, I've only talked about recording information from the cortex. But to produce a visual prosthesis, we need to stimulate. So, if we stimulated the cells whose receptive fields are in this location, we would produce a perception of a flash in that location that only the monkey can see. How do we know that the monkey sees it? How do we know what it looks like? Well, unfortunately, we can't ask them what they see, but we can train them to tell us something about that phosphine. We start by training the monkey to fixate a central point on the screen, like this white dot, and we start by presenting real visual stimuli on the screen and rewarding the monkey for making eye movements toward those stimuli. So here we flash a white dot, and the monkey makes an eye movement towards it, symbolized by the green arrow. We then choose another random location and reward the monkey for making an eye movement towards it. Once he's got good at this task, we can begin to interleave these real stimuli with electrical stimulation of electrodes and produce a phosphine. The monkey sees the flash and naturally makes a saccade towards it. This tells us not only where in the visual field the flash occurred, but we can also change the current that we inject in that electrode to see how often he makes that saccade, how noticeable or how big perhaps.
Okay, so they're just stimulating. They're not actually presenting the monkey with a stimulus here. They're not presenting him with a little dot that flashes. They're just stimulating the neuron using the Neuralink device, and then that is essentially fooling the monkey into thinking that there was a flash there, causing the monkey to then make a saccade to that move to where that fictive dot would be inside the part of the monkey's brain that's being stimulated. So it's pretty cool.
Stimulation phosphine is that we're producing. Let's look at code performing this task. I want to show you first at 1/4 speed. There's a visual flash, and he makes an eye movement towards it. The monkey can only see what is white on this screen. He can't see his own eye movement, and he certainly can't see when we stimulate. But here we stimulate, and he makes the same saccade to the same location because we stimulated the same electrode. Nothing appears on the screen at that time, and he has no other cue to make that eye movement. Let me show you this in real time. You can see monkeys like to work very quickly. And when we stimulate, he makes that saccade in real time.
That's pretty cool. Oh, monkey's done.
And looks like he's had enough. So what I've shown you is a way to produce a phosphene in the visual field. This is not something new in visual neuroscience, but if you think about that phosphene as a single pixel in a visual image, all we need to do is scale up and produce a great many more pixels and have them covering the visual field. This is a schematic of what a visual prosthesis using our N1 device might look like. A camera, the output from a camera would be processed by an iPhone, for example, which would then stream the data to the device, and the image would be converted into a pattern of stimulation of the electrodes into visual cortex. With 1,000 electrodes, we might be able to produce an image resembling something that you see there on the right. But as Avinash told you, our next generation of the device will have 16,000 electrodes. If you put a device on both sides of your visual cortex, that would give you 32,000 points of light to make an image in someone who's blind. Our goal will be to turn the lights on for someone who's spent decades living in the dark. Thanks very much. I'll pass you over to Joey, who's now going to talk about another very exciting application of our device.
Okay, that's all pretty cool. I'll definitely use that in my neuroplasticity class when I talk about visual prosthetics, when I talk about sensory substitution. Yeah, I think that's neat.
Thank you, Dan.
Oof, they're almost done.
So my name is Joey. I'm a neuroengineer, and I'm the head for the Next Gen team at Neuralink. So for persons with spinal cord injury, the connection between the brain and the body is severed. The brain continues functioning normally, but it's unable to communicate.
Trip, you're asking like, okay, greater light amplitude increases action potential, firing frequency. Yes, that's basically what he described. How would they change brightness and colors using this technology? That was not addressed in this at all. And color processing is very different. It uses a different set of retinal ganglion cells than the ones that that we talked about in class that are on and off. It's a different sort of organization in the cortex. So essentially, for someone with a prosthetic like this, they wouldn't really be able to perceive color using this sort of very simplistic way of just stimulating parts of the visual cortex. It is likely, though, that they would at least be able to see contrast. So as they move around and as they take a look at, if they're looking this way or this way with the camera's going to pick up different features, and that would be probably what they could see would be just essentially like a very rough black and white image. So that's the best that they could hope for.
Communicate with the outside world. You've already heard about how we can use the N1 link as a communication prosthesis to help someone with spinal cord injury control a computer or a phone, but it can also be used to reanimate the body. Let me show you how. First, a little neuroanatomy. Movement intentions arise in motor cortex and are sent down long nerve fibers through the spinal cord.
Okay, so I already asked about this, and so maybe we're going to get an answer.
These are upper motor neurons. In the spinal cord, they synapse, that is, make a connection with another motor neuron, a lower motor neuron, which sends these movement intentions to the muscles, which contract, and in turn you have movement. While, of course, there are many other circuits involved in voluntary movement, you can think about the spinal cord as many pairs of these two connections. And in spinal cord injury, one of these connections is severed, unable to make the muscles contract. Let's zoom a little bit further. So here you can see on the left a cross-section of the spinal cord with a fiber coming down schematically. This travels through the white matter tracts. This is the upper motor neuron. And then it synapses within this butterfly-shaped region of gray matter in what's known as a motor pool. In the motor pool, the lower motor neuron descends out the ventral roots to the muscles, which contract. And then the sensory consequences of those movements, for example, the touch of your hand against an object, return to the spinal cord through the dorsal roots and ascend the spinal cord up into the sensory regions of the brain. Again, in spinal cord injury, this connection is severed. If we could place electrodes into the spinal cord, say in a motor pool adjacent to lower motor neurons, we could stimulate those neurons, activating them, and in turn causing the muscle to contract and movement to occur. But this is very hard to do. The spinal cord is quite delicate, and it moves significantly within the bony spinal canal. This could cause damage to the electrode, it could cause damage to tissue, or both. But our electrodes are small and flexible, and our robot is able to insert them deep into tissue, perhaps all the way down into the ventral horn of the spinal cord. And so we have done just that. Here you can see a view from the R1 robot. It's a targeting view, and we've placed electrodes across many millimeters of the spinal cord. And the R1 robot is able to insert those electrodes deep into the ventral horn, into motor pools, in very close proximity to lower motor neurons. This is important because it allows them to have a localized connection to those neurons and activate very precise movements.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about that.
Now, to track movement, it's very common to use motion capture markers, like you might see in the production of a movie. These can be placed with a light adhesive, and you can see me placing these on my hand. We're going to use these markers to let us zoom in on movement in the next couple of slides. Okay, so here's a pig walking on a treadmill, and you may have seen something like this before in a previous Neuralink presentation. But unlike before, this pig has more than one Neuralink device. There's a device in the brain, but there's also one in the spinal cord. And we can stream neural data from this device, these devices, in real time and use them to do things like decode the movement of the joints of the pig. So here you can see on the left a time series of the hip, knee, and ankle, and we're decoding those movements. So this is super cool, but that's actually not what we want to do. We want to go in the other direction. We would like to stimulate the spinal cord and cause movement to occur. Okay, so let's do that. So here's a pig, a happy and healthy pig doing what pigs like to do, which is root around for food and snacks. And as you'll see on the floor, there's a blue square. This is a voluntary engagement zone where the pig places itself, indicating that it's comfortable to receive stimulation. When it's in this zone, we stimulate, and if the pig leaves this zone, we'll stop stimulating. And as before, you can see we're able to track the position of the joints and also stream neural data as well. Okay, so let's stimulate an electrode. So here's one electrode on one thread that when we stimulate causes a flexion movement of the leg. So on the left, you can see the movement of the joints, and you can also see the time series of the stimulation pattern in yellow. So the leg is moving up. Here's another electrode, which when we stimulate causes an extensor movement. This is actually a little harder to see because the leg is straightening and the hips are shifting, but if you look carefully, you can see how the leg is moving. We can stimulate on a great variety of threads and produce different movements and actually sequence them spatial-temporally to provide patterns. So on the left, you can see a time series of different stimulation on different electrodes. You can see the movements of the joints. And on the right, we're zooming in on muscle activity that gives us an idea of the kind of strength and power and specificity of those movements as well. So in addition to doing sequences, we can also achieve sustained movement. These are powerful muscle contractions of the sort that you might need for standing or other load-bearing activities and are really crucial for interacting through the world. Okay, so stimulating the spinal cord is only one piece of the story. You also have to get command signals for the stimulation of the spinal cord. Unfortunately, we have a way to do that. We have the N1 link that you've already heard about placed in motor cortex. How would that work? So we place threads in motor cortex and record spikes. These spikes would be wirelessly transmitted in real time and decoded into patterns of stimulation. Stimulation would then be delivered to the ventral horn of the spinal cord, to the appropriate motor pool for the muscles that we'd like to activate. We then stimulate, activate those lower motor neurons, which causes the muscles to contract and movement to occur. Now, of course, movement without sensation is actually kind of difficult. Just think about what it would be like to try to move your limbs if they're numb. But we can also get sensory information as well. So the sensory consequences of your movement can be recorded in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord in the form of spikes. For example, here, a feather touching the hand. These spikes can in turn be decoded in real time, sent to patterns of stimulation to either the same N1 device in the brain or perhaps a different one in a sensory area. Stimulation of that part of the brain would cause percepts of touch and proprioception, closing the loop.
Yeah, I don't know.
So putting those two loops together, we have motor intentions decoded from the brain, used to stimulate the spinal cord, causing movement, and then the sensory consequences of those actions being recorded in the spinal cord to stimulate the brain, causing perception.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we talked about earlier, and so it makes sense that this is how it's gonna have to work. That you have to have this bypass of the spinal cord. If the damage is in the spinal cord, the connection from the brain to this part of the spinal cord, like controlling muscles in the hand, well, you'll need to have an electrode array in the spinal cord in order to drive those motor units. But the thing is, like, to have precise coordination of the motor units, you know, I showed this. Let me try to bring it up again. I think I still have it. Yeah, right here. You know, if you have a quadriplegic, you're going to have electrode arrays within the ventral horn of this portion in the cervical enlargement, which innervates the muscles that make up the arms. And then we have a lumbar enlargement of the spinal cord that innervates the muscles of the legs. And then we have, you know, in the thoracic region where it's primarily innervating the muscles within the abdomen. And the ventral horn there is relatively small because you don't have that much complicated muscle to deal with. But in these areas, like, there's a lot of muscles in the arm that have to be tightly controlled and regulated. So I don't know how you would have like a precise array in here where you can have, like, you know, individual control of individual fingers, as well as like muscles in the forearm, as well as muscles in the biceps, you know, the upper arm, as well as like muscles like sort of in the shoulder. And you would have to do that over and over and over again. And like, you would have to have a really, really precise array in order to do that, to have precise motor control. I mean, it's something, and I guess it's like a step, but the array would have to be highly. You'd have to have a lot of outputs, and would have to match the muscles. So, yeah, I mean, these are important steps in trying to get to that goal, but yeah, we're pretty far away from the fully automatic driving here for sure. So let's continue on.
Now, we have a lot of work to do to achieve this full vision, but I hope you can see how the pieces are all there to achieve this. And if you find this prospect as exciting to you as it is to me, I hope you'll consider joining us here at Neuralink.
They're hiring.
Thank you.
Yeah, Trip, I think you're right. Like, it won't be very advanced. All right, so this is the wrap up. Let's see. I'm sure there's a bunch of questions in here. It looks like they're on stage for a long time. I'm not going to stay for that.
And we'll do some Q&A.
Let's see how they do here, though. We're going to bring everyone on stage. We'll maybe look at a question.
This is obviously amazing and has clear therapeutic potential. It would also be great for the scientific neuroscience community to access some of these tools. Do you have any plans to make these available to neuroscientists?
Oh, there's Weird Al.
Yes, we do. It's a great question. I think there's probably a lot that can be figured out if we provide the surgical robot and devices to neuroscience research departments at universities and hospitals. So I think at the point at which we need to be in production with the machines and obviously have the FDA approvals, but I think it would make a lot of sense to provide this to research universities and hospitals.
I want a question about artificial intelligence. I want someone to ask about.
The question is, of the data that we...
Of the data sets that you've collected,
there we are.
Are there any that you plan to open source for the scientific community?
Yeah, I think that would be fine. I think, yeah, sure, absolutely.
Because I think it could be really interesting for people working in AI research to build upon that.
It's an AI question.
And build foundation models for the brain.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I actually got no problem with just publishing it on our website. You can use it if you want.
Yeah, looking forward.
Great.
All right, we'll do one more.
You go.
Thank you. Thank you for the very wonderful presentation. So I have one question. So as we know, for implantable electrode, either for stimulation or recording, after we implant the electrode, the scar tissue will grow around the electrode, and especially for recording, the signal we get will become smaller and smaller after long-term implant. How do you solve this issue?
For context, I'm Zach. I lead the microfabrication team on brain interfaces. I don't think we can solve it specifically, but one advantage we have is both the flexibility and the small size of our threads to try to limit that scar tissue and that damage. And some future work that we have started working on, that we'll continue working on, is pushing the size of the threads down, just to try to limit the immune response and really limit that scar tissue growth.
Actually, I want to follow up. So, do you think it will be helpful to actually load some drug on the surface of your electrode, or some other way?
Well, I think maybe the question is what sort of signal degradation have we seen over time?
Why is Elon answering this?
Basically, just does it work a year later? Does it work 2 years later? It does. So.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So in terms of thread longevity specifically, really the gold standard that we can use to assess is the data we have from our animal participants. And so for that, I'm not sure if it was mentioned before, but the longest data we have right now is for an animal participant who went 600 days with useful functioning channels where we were doing something useful with the signals for BCI. And then with the newest version of our device, we have sort of a collection of participants who are at or near 1 year of data and completely useful functioning BCI from that as well.
Thank you.
If I may add one more thing. So you mentioned potentially having drugs to kind of reduce inflammation. So one of the things that we are actually actively working on is having some sort of biological coating to either reduce inflammation or make them slippery. So, you mentioned, you heard from the presentation that one of the challenges that we have is removing the threads from these neomembrane tissue that are formed after implantation.
That's right, and then you slip out of the matrix after 2
programs
years.
like that where we're really looking at kind of incorporating some of the learnings from biology and these coatings into our threads so that we can hopefully reduce inflammation as well as make it easier to extract.
We're also continuing to reduce the size of the electrode. So when the electrode gets really small, there's the sort of inflammation response or scar tissue becomes minuscule. So it's like a very tiny electrode the body basically ignores.
He said that, didn't he say that? He's just repeating what the other guy said. Look at them all, like, dude, he said that. Okay, well, I'm done. Yeah, I think we've been doing this how long? Like 3 hours now. I mean, I guess. But the guy said it. Right. So, so scar tissue in the brain, that is an important thing. Like when you're putting these electrodes in, that is a possibility of like having scar tissue. And that always can be, and that's going to impede the ability for the electrode to continue to pick up useful signals over time. The smaller it is, the less damage it's going to do. So there's that. Yeah. So yeah, Tim, if you go back and watch, there was a couple of minor technical hiccups. on my end, they also took like longer than a half hour to start their presentation. So I was trying to fill that in with various garbage. So there's that. But the first part of when he's talking about artificial intelligence is really kind of batshit crazy, to be perfectly frank. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about artificial intelligence. I mean, I do think that there's nothing particularly unique about human consciousness that couldn't potentially be replicated in some degree in silico. So I think at some point, like, there could be potential artificial intelligence, but he had a bunch of weird stuff to say about the Neuralink will allow us to fight against a nefarious artificial intelligence, and that, like, this is the long-term goal, to either have to fight against a nefarious artificial intelligence a la Terminator and Skynet, or that if we have a super benevolent and a benevolent super artificial intelligence, that would allow us to interface with that artificial intelligence faster and more efficiently. Okay. The scientific team, though, like, these are real scientists. They're doing real work. You know, I can appreciate what their efforts are, and this presentation was, it was them presenting on their work and the update of their work, and I think that that's fine. So, but yeah, the artificial intelligence thing was wacky. So, all right. Well, thanks for sticking through. I've got 2 concurrent viewers at the moment. It's Trip and Tim. So appreciate it. This will be up. Obviously, people can watch this. Until next time, I have more videos coming up. So I've been doing sort of breaking down some of the conversations I've had with a creationist on his views on the genetic entropy and decay of the genome, and so I have more videos coming out on that. That'll be probably in a couple of days. Actually, the next one will come out. So, good stuff. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time. So, adios.